Mafia: The Old Country is a weird game because in some ways it's fantastic. The voice acting, performances, and writing, I think for the most part, are top tier, one of the most impressive games of the year in that regard. But then other parts of the game just lag so far behind the competition, it's frankly jarring. And a lot of people have compared it to an Xbox 360 AAA game, and I don't actually think that's that far off. It does really start to feel like you're playing a game from a bygone era, both in good ways and bad. This shouldn't come as a surprise if you're at all familiar with the troubles of Hangar 13 and the Mafia franchise in general over the last decade or so. This will make perfect sense. But to give you just the quick rundown, basically after Mafia 3 released to, let's just say, not great reviews, the franchise ran into a bunch of trouble. It sold decently well. According to 2K executives, about a month later, they had already sold about 4.5 million copies of the game, despite it being a buggy, broken mess at launch. And 4.5 million is nothing to scoff at, but it didn't have much of a tail on it. It took another handful of years, and I believe it was in 2021, where executives came forward and off the cuff mentioned that they had reached 7 million lifetime sales for Mafia 3, which is again an impressive number, but those were most likely garnered at steep discounts and bundle deals and things like that. So it did well, but again, Mafia 3 was a very expensive project, so its profitability certainly comes into question. There's also just the reality that after Mafia 3, the confidence that 2K executives had in Hangar 13 was shaken a little bit, and so they reportedly sent them to do a lot of support work on other projects like Borderlands, and after a few rounds of layoffs over the coming years, they eventually got the chance to do Mafia Definitive Edition, and that was received very, very well and was very impressive. Seriously, if you've not played Mafia Definitive Edition, what are you doing? It is so good. It's amazing. You should go play that. And it was after that point that they got greenlit to work on Mafia: The Old Country, which was supposed to be a return to form. They were going to shed the open world design of Mafia 3, which was heavily inspired by games very familiar to Ubisoft fans, we'll just say. And instead, they were going to focus on story first and foremost. They would have a large open world that they would carefully handcraft and recreate with historical references and inspirations, but primarily this was a story-based game. It would take inspiration from Mafia 1 and 2 and even games like Uncharted. And it was going to be done in a lot less time. And as a result, they had very limited scope, budget, scale, and things to play with. Data miners have, for example, found information about things like horse races and car races that would be optional side activities for you to engage in while traveling to various stores around the map to upgrade your gear in between story missions, for example. That stuff seemingly was completely cut. However, just this morning as I'm filming this video, it was revealed that they're actually going to be expanding these things and bringing them to the game in a free update in the coming months. So it seems like the game's commercial success at the outset has gotten them greenlit to spend more time and resources producing additional content for the game, which is always cool. They wanted to put this stuff in, but they had to cut it to get the game out the door, and now the big bosses at 2K are letting them spend the time to put it together and actually get it in the game, which I think is cool. I understand the desire to have the complete package at launch, but this was a $50 budget game at launch. They made cuts like this to hit that price point and to just get the damn thing out the door. And so as a result, it wasn't the end-all be-all Assassin's Creed Valhalla monstrosity that I think some people expected it to be, which is inevitable. And that's something we'll talk about time and time again in this video, is expectations, because I think a lot of people have always struggled with Mafia, that it at first glance looks like it's going to be a Grand Theft Auto game, and then it's just not, and they find it startling, and therefore it must be bad because it's not Grand Theft Auto, but with Mafia storylines. But that's never been what these games are. And in the case of Mafia: The Old Country, they just started to go with the idea that if you can't do something well, you just shouldn't do it at all. If you can't do the open world well, don't bother trying, because a bad open world is worse than no open world for most games. Mafia: The Old Country was aiming to be a return to form for the franchise. They were trying to go back to basics, do what they did best, and not much more. And honestly, they really succeeded at that. Mafia: The Old Country has an incredible story. The voice acting performances are stellar. There's a lot of really interesting like parallelism and fascinating ways that they wove this story together that we're going to talk about. It's really really, really interesting, even if I have some problems with the end of the game, which we'll get to. But it's the gameplay where they just haven't done much of anything differently or better than they've done it in decades past. Like, you would think that they would return to the basics of, simplistic gameplay, linear sequences, and that they would then enhance and expand upon that and add some complexity within those basic elements, but they just don't. Instead, it plays in many ways like an Xbox 360 open world game that is kind of lacking in depth. And I don't think that's that far off. I don't think that the game is bad as a result, but I do think it's interesting that they really didn't try to do much of anything novel or new with the formula. They really did just return to basics and nothing more in the gameplay department. Narratively, they did a lot of interesting things, but in the gameplay department, really not much new. There are little glimpses of things that they wanted to do, as far as I can tell, such as in chapter 4, when Isabella gives you the camera that you can try to use to take a photograph. This is used elsewhere in the game, such as in chapter 7, when you get to take a picture exposing the Marquis Saragossa with a photograph of him in a revealing position. But other than that, it feels largely underutilized. It's almost like they intended for this to be the built-in photo mode for the game, and that you were going to get to use it whenever you wanted to capture photos, and maybe you could take photos of unique landmarks from particular angles for extra perks or cosmetics or something. Typical stuff you'd expect to see in an open world game, but that's just not really here. And it's likely because they had that as an idea at some point, and then they had to cut it for the sake of just getting the game out the door, because that's a theme that you will hear time and time again. It really seems like Mafia: The Old Country was a game put together on a shoestring budget, or at least heavy restrictions from 2K because of the spotty track record in recent memory. And somehow they managed to pull it off, but it was at the cost of sacrificing a lot of these other things that you might come to expect in a typical game like this. I don't think the game suffers that much as a result, but it's worth pointing out. But this brings me to the overarching point before we get into more specific critiques and discussions, which is that Mafia: The Old Country is a narrative game that happens to be set within an open world. It is nothing more, nothing less, and it will be judged and quantified on the merits of that narrative, since that's where all of the focus is. And lucky for Hangar 13, the narrative, I think, is really compelling, and the voice acting and motion capture performances are freaking phenomenal. So it makes it really easy to fall in love with this story here. But I do think there is a large subset of players who have been accustomed for the last decade that when they get a game that has a large map, they're going to be fed open world activities a la Ubisoft games. It really is the PS4, Xbox One era of every game going open world. Even games that before weren't all of a sudden end up being open world or semi-open world. Even like God of War 2018 is sort of open world, like it's open webbed sort of, where everything comes back to the central anchor point, but then you can splay off from there. But then God of War Ragnarok definitely opens it up even more to much bigger levels and more expansive levels. Things like The Last of Us with part 1 being very, very linear, and then The Last of Us part 2 introduces large levels like in Seattle. I think it was just the trend at the time that everybody was going open world, so that's just what you did. And it definitely is a trend that Mafia also fell victim to with Mafia 3. But like I said earlier, if you can't do something well, I personally think it's better to just not do it. We've all seen the compilation videos of a crappy open world activity, side quest, dynamic event, whatever, in an open world game like in Star Wars Outlaws, and then the whole game is dismissed as a result of a crappy side quest or a repetitive activity that you're tasked with doing in order to improve the level within this district of the open world. And I think with them, they just decided, you know what, we're not great at that. We don't have the budget or time to do it anyways, so let's just not. And some people will be excited by that. Some people will accept it begrudgingly, and other people will hate Mafia: The Old Country for it. But I think it's just very clear that you understand what the game is and what it isn't. And I want to stress that because I don't think it's fair as a matter of practice and principle to critique something for not being what you wanted it to be. I think you need to meet the game where it is and try to critique it for what it is, not for what you dreamed it would be. And once you do that, then you can offer actionable and constructive criticism and critique in order to help the devs hopefully make an even better game next time around. Because you won't be critiquing a Pokemon game for having too much water, but instead you'll be critiquing a game like Starfield for being a bad space exploration game when that was the whole point of the game to begin with. And so in this video, I hope to discuss and critique Mafia: The Old Country as best I can from a fan's perspective, considering what it is, not what like the dream Rockstar version of the game would have been. I understand there were constraints, I understand there were limitations, and I think the game is remarkable, especially considering those things. But it is not a game for everybody. It is a 12-hour game for $50, and for some people that sounds like a deal if the story is really good. For other people, the idea of spending $50 for a 12-hour game, period, is ridiculous. It's literally a matter of personal preference and your justification with your purchases. So all I'm gonna do is critique the game as it is, and you can watch this and get a feel for it and decide for yourself if you want to play it. Or maybe, and most likely, you've already played Mafia: The Old Country if you're watching this video, because spoiler alert, I'm going to spoil everything. So buckle up. If you haven't played the game, be warned. I'm gonna go through everything. I'm gonna make allusions to past Mafia games, though I will try to point out specifically when I do that. So if I make a reference to like Mafia 2 or Mafia 3's narrative specifically, I will let you know in case you are going back and playing those, and I'll let you skip over that. So it's okay if you've not played the other ones. I'll warn you before like a big spoiler hits, but just be aware, I'm gonna talk about the story of The Old Country pretty specifically and in depth, so buckle up. Also, just so you know, I'm doing a giveaway this month for a PlayStation 5 Pro, just as a thank you to the community for being awesome and making my dreams a reality. So if you want to enter, just go to the link tree linked in my bio or scan the QR code on screen now. You click this link, it takes you to the giveaway itself, and then you sign up. It's free to enter, but if you do all of these individual activities, you can actually get more entry tickets to increase your chances of winning, which is cool. We'll announce the winner live on stream, and then we'll do another giveaway for September. So buckle up for that, guys. It's a good time to be a viewer of Luke Stevens, I'll tell you what. But with all that said, let's get into the nitty-gritty details of Mafia: The Old Country. I think the best way to go through Mafia: The Old Country is to go chronologically through the story as they add elements and components to the gameplay loop and then also to the narrative. I'm not going to go into excruciating detail with each and every plot point or discussion or conversation because, like I said, chances are if you're watching this, you've already played the game, but we'll go through it in broad strokes, then point out specific things as we need to. The game starts out in 1904 with our protagonist Enzo Favara and his friend Gaetano working within a sulfur mine owned by Don Ruggero Spararo. I'm gonna warn you, my Italian pronunciation, not great. I know you're supposed to roll your R. Spadaro. I know I'm supposed to do that. I'm not Italian though. I'm just sour cream. I'm too white for this, even though Italians are also white. You get what I mean. Like, I can't say words, so I'll do my best. This dynamic duo are Carusi, or individually singular would be Caruso. This roughly translates to young laborer or young boy, and it can also be used apparently as a bit of an insult, basically just calling an adult man a boy or a child or a teenager. It's insulting the maturity of the individual, which is why multiple characters later in the game will refer to Enzo insultingly under this label. It also has class implications as well, because Enzo is effectively a slave at the start of the game. His father sold him into slavery, as it's mentioned later, for only 100 lira, which is not a ton of money in this world, but he basically sold his own son to settle a debt he had with Spadaro. So insulting Enzo by constantly referring to him as a Crusoe is certainly just that, an insult. But it's also important to understand, because this is something that will be omnipresent throughout the entire game, is where Enzo started and how he doesn't deserve anything that he's getting because of where he started, which makes everything he achieves all the more remarkable. But it also means that he's not entitled to any of it, and if the Don or anybody else deems him unfit, it can be ripped away in an instant without second thought. Through this opening sequence, we of course get basic movement and stealth tutorials. There's a little bit of dialogue dialogue establishing that Enzo and his friend Gaetano want to escape to Empire Bay. They even have a little postcard for Empire Bay, which is really cute, and this is something that they constantly refer to, and it's called back on multiple times throughout the rest of the game in quiet moments when Enzo might glance at the postcard to remind him of what this is all ultimately about. We also see a small carved wooden horse in the opening of the game, and this is going to be important later. There are also a couple of elements that will come back later, specifically with the gas leaks within the mines and how if they're ignited with a flame, they can cause explosions and mine collapses. That's called foreshadowing. It's gonna come back, I'll tell you what. And to their credit, they do this a lot. There's all sorts of little bitty things that you'll see just for a moment. It might be a hairpin in a lock, but that specifically comes back later to explain how something happens or how a character was able to do something. It's pretty well done, and all of this stuff in the cave system definitely comes back. There's also a sequence where we see Il Merlo, who comes up later in the game multiple times, and he's one of the underlings of Spadaro, the guy that owns the mine and is basically the Don of a rival family. This sequence is also about establishing how bad the Spadaro family is and what they're willing to do to make their money, enslaving people, and in this case, there are multiple gas leaks within the mines, and a crew has just gone missing. Everybody that works in the mines is telling them this is a terrible idea, we shouldn't be working right now, the mines are going to collapse and kill us all. That's probably why those guys haven't come back from their shift, but they're cast into the mines once more because bad guy's evil. I know it's easy to just be like, oh, bad guy being bad guy, he wants them to do this because he's mean. But in this case, I think it does actually make sense, and there is an actual historical backing for this. This was a real thing, these sulfur mines, and the Crusoe, what they'd have to go through is unbelievable. So this is very, very real, unfortunately, and it just fits with the story to show the bad guy being really bad so that we're motivated to go and mutilate them later. This is also where we can see the limited budget and scope of the game rear its head. Later in the game, we're going to return to these exact same caves and hallways and everything. They actually found a way to recycle them and reuse them, which I just think is a clever way, not just to bring the story literally full circle, but also to practically reuse assets that you don't need to replace, because if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And you found a way to go back to a previous set and reuse it, why not? The mine begins to collapse in what is probably the first Uncharted-esque sequence where things are on rails, but it is cinematic and pretty impressive, if I do say so myself. While they're escaping the mine, they have to squeeze through some tight corners, and at one point Gaetano squeezes through one and drops the envelope that includes all of the money they've been saving for their escape to Empire Bay. Because this money represents their future, Gaetano tries to go back for it, which is never a good idea. You remember Forspoken? That thing where like she has a cat in her apartment and the fire's burning and she goes back for the duffel bag of cash in the middle of the fire, and then it all burns and everything's terrible. This, I will say, reminded me of that because it's always a bad idea. If something is burning and exploding and you're gonna die, clearly if you stay too long, don't go back for the money. Never go back for the money. This isn't like anywhere near cringe levels of Forspoken, to be clear, but I did think it was a fun parallel that going back for the money is never a good idea. This is also perhaps supposed to be symbolic of the overall game's narrative, that if you chase the money, if your greed overcomes you, death will inevitably follow. But I think that's probably reading too much into it. Anyway, Gaetano gets squished, and then Enzo is one of the sole miners to escape out of this tunnel system. And when he gets out, he confronts the man that sent them in there. This starts our first knife fight sequence, which also serves as the tutorial. These knife fights have been the subject of much discussion and debate around Mafia, the Old Country, because they basically serve as the capstones for multiple chapters. You can rest assured that you will typically start a chapter by getting assigned to go on some mission or some activity for the Dawn. You'll go and start what seems like a rather unremarkable series of errands when something will inevitably go bad, and then you'll be tasked with either stealthing your way through an encampment of enemies or just shooting your way through them to get to the end boss, who you will engage in a knife fight, after which a cutscene plays out, moving the story forward, and then the cycle repeats. It's a formula that they repeat multiple times throughout the game. You'll see once we get to the center chunk of the game. We're gonna skip through a lot of it because it's just that in large parts. But I don't think the knife fights are necessarily bad. I would like tighter parry windows, and frankly, I'd like it to be more difficult. I didn't fail any of these knife fights the entire game, and I think that's true of most of the game. I think it's just too easy. I play through all of these games when I review and critique them on the normal difficulty because I want to experience it as the developers intended for the normal audience to experience it. And I feel like on the normal default settings for everything, the game is just too easy across the board, whether it's the races, which largely seem to be scripted, and on tracks, yeah, it doesn't seem like you can lose them unless you like really screwed up. So I just think it's too easy. I think it's too easy. Even the knife fights, think they're too easy. I also think it could have been really cool if some of these knife fights included unique elements or mechanics for each individual boss fighting you. Later fights will include things like throwing dust at Enzo to blind him, and this is something you can dodge. But I also think it could have been cool if some of the bosses were willing to like tie you up in a grapple, and maybe some of them play really, really dirty and will try to gouge your eyes out or bite you or something. Instead, all of them pretty much play the same, whether you're fighting an actual crime boss or a low-level grunt. They all kind of knife fight the same, which doesn't feel right. It feels like some of them should at least have nicer weaponry to make them more dangerous, or maybe some of them are better at scrapping and they don't have this sense of honor or something, or dignity, and so they fight dirty. I don't know, but it feels like there should have been more complexity here, personally, especially because it ends chapters. It's like a major capstone thing. For certain moments, it may be the last thing somebody ever does. So it feels like it should be this big momentous thing that's like really challenging and cool, but instead it just feels really repetitive. I appreciate the historical backing for it. They posted some developer vlogs and things where they actually traveled to Italy and had local knife makers make them these daggers that they put into the game. So all of these things are realistic. They're actually representative of what would have been used in the time. And I appreciate even the sound designers using these things to capture the audio that's in the game. They really put a lot of time and care into those elements of historical accuracy, but it doesn't mean that it's not repetitive. And I guess I could also just mention that right now, just because I critique something does not mean I don't appreciate the work that went into it. You know, I appreciate that a lot of care went into the specific style of how they slash with these weapons, or how the guns reload, the sound effects they're in, the cars, all of the crazy amounts of detail and research that went into those, with even like the specific number of gears within the transmission and seeing how fast it could go and how much it weighed. I appreciate all of that. But ultimately, we're talking about a video game. And so if we're looking at a specific gameplay mechanic and it's repetitive, I need to call it out as repetitive, even if it may be historically grounded. You know, after all, like, just because the astronauts went to the moon and weren't bored, it doesn't mean that making a game where you just go to the moon won't be boring. You know, just because like something cool historically is tied to it doesn't mean that it works in a video game, you know? But anyway, the fight ends with Enzo slashing the face of his would-be killer, and he escapes down a ravine and is able to hop on the back of a horse and escape the mine, narrowly dodging being shot. This scar that he left on Il Merlo will come up multiple times again and again throughout the story, with constant references to it, and it's also, of course, visually represented with the physical mark on his face. Enzo rides and escapes the mine, and then we get our first title sequence. In the background, we also see Mount Etna, which is smoking very ominously in the distance. Because I'm an overachiever, I Googled Sicily during this time period that the game was going to be set in before the game came out, just to be like, oh, I wonder what historical events they could use within the game's narrative. And I found that this thing is like super, super active. This volcano, like, as far as I can tell, there wasn't specifically an eruption in like 1909 or whenever it happens in the game, but they do have these like paintings of what it looked like when it did erupt. In like, this one is in 1770 is when it was painted, but it depicts the 1766 eruption. They have satellite images from the ISS showing what it looks like when it starts going off. Like, that's the smoke trail. Absolutely crazy. Absolutely crazy. I mean, look at the house buried under it. It's ridiculous. It's crazy. I'm scared of tornadoes, you know, like tornadoes. I don't mess with those. Hurricanes. I don't mess with hurricanes. what are we doing living next to volcanoes? I mean, what, like, fam, what are we doing? It's crazy to me. I understand it's a gorgeous island. It does erupt all the time, and when it does, it's not like it goes Pompeii levels. I get that, but I mean, volcanoes. I would say it's an irrational fear of mine, but I feel like it's very rational. I feel like that's a very normal thing to not want to mess with. I don't mess with volcanoes, okay? Every time I would see it in the distance while playing the old country, I'd be like, oh, nope. This is a bad idea. And I think we all kind of were braced for something to happen with the volcano, but we'll get there. After running away from the vine and being chased by Spadaro's men, Enzo ends up in a barn about to get caught by the Spadaro men when Don Torrisi, the man running another rival crime syndicate family and a nearby vineyard, he comes in and tells them they're on his land and they must get out. This immediately establishes the tension between the Torrisi family and the Spadaro family and makes it clear that they're both in service of the Baron, and they have this sort of respectful, not so respectful relationship with each other because they're both using the land of the Baron, who owns everything that's being used, but they are effectively the custodians of that property and land, and they can become wealthy from it. They work the land, they're in charge of it, they protect it and everything, but the Baron ultimately also profits from it. And of course, it can also be used to launder money from not so reputable endeavors that the Baron wants to pursue, which of course is the whole thing in all of the Mafia games is, it's pretty basic. You have what seems like a totally normal business, but then in the background, you actually have a bunch of criminal stuff going on, but you funnel the money through it to launder the money so it looks legitimate. So you can always be like, oh, no, I don't run a crime family. I run a vineyard. I make wine. It's like, I also smuggle stuff with the wine, like guns and counterfeit money, but I also run a vineyard. And so you always have plausible deniability, friends. That's the key. Like, you may think that this whole thing is about me making YouTube videos and streaming and stuff like that, talking about video games. No. This whole thing is a front for me to buy candles and collect them because I have a serious problem and borderline addiction. That whole shelf down there is nothing but candles, some of which have Todd Howard's face on them, but that's just to make you think it's about video games. It's actually about my addiction to candles. So, prime example. I don't know what that diatribe was. Oh yeah. Don Torrisi saves him. So Enzo is saved by Don Torrisi and his men soon after we meet Cesare and Luca, and Enzo is given a place to stay within the vineyard grounds, though it's far from flashy or what most people would consider comfortable. But like I said, a lot of things that are shown in Mafia the Old Country come up later. For example, we specifically got to see where Enzo was sleeping just a few moments before this, when he was sitting with Gaetano talking about going to Empire Bay. It might have seemed like a random place to set a scene. Why couldn't they just have that conversation behind the building or outside or something? Why did they specifically set that scene within those sleeping quarters? But it's because they wanted to show you where he started and where he's already grown to. They wanted to show you that, no, this is actually really great for Enzo. He appreciates this because it's not sleeping in basically slave quarters with a bunch of other people who were sold into slavery within a mine. So all of these little bitty things, you may think it's just an offhand thing, but they thought about it and they very intentionally wanted you to see this is where he was, this is where he is, and it's going to keep going like that as the game progresses. And this is also something that's done in previous Mafia games as well, where in Mafia 2 or Mafia 1, you might even end up with something as basic as a clunker car or having no car at all, and then you get to upgrade it, get nicer clothes, your apartment gets upgraded or what have you. It's a really good way of showing progression of somebody's lifestyle as you can visually represent major improvements to their life. We also get to meet Isabella in these early sections, and she is the daughter of the Dawn. From the immediate outset, it was pretty clear what was happening. They liked each other in a romantical way. And, this is something that maybe it's just me, but I feel like it is pretty fair to say it's a bad idea to get into an illicit affair with the daughter of a crime gang lord, crime boss who you owe everything to and has exhibited rage and a willingness to kill people over much, much less. I feel like that's going to end badly. You know, I feel like that there's very few outcomes which are good if you go down that path. And so as the story progresses and Enzo and Isabella get closer and eventually entwined, I will say I had this overwhelming sense of dread for how this was going to result, because I was like, this is a Mafia game. The odds are shockingly low that this is all just going to end happily ever after. That's just not how this works. It's just not. You don't get to do this and get away with it like nothing happened. Doesn't go well. Over the next handful of hours of gameplay, you'll do things like training with Luca, who becomes your mentor. You'll learn combat skills from him. You'll get to participate in a traditional palio horse race in San Celeste. You'll work on delivering some wine with Isabella when L'Ombra, a Spadaro thug who comes up later, starts a confrontation with you, in which case you get into another, say with me now, knife fight. You fight and kick each other's asses before eventually seeing Luca come in and break it up. But it also reinforces an underlying tension, because they specifically say you cannot mention this to the Don, that for one, Spadaro's men dared to confront one of his men, but also specifically his daughter, and like get rough with his daughter. If he knew about that, all-out war would break out in the valley, which would be terrible. No one wants that. You know what that is, though? Foreshadowing. We also get some broader character building, specifically between Luca, Cesare, and the crime family in general. And all of these missions and chapters of the game play out like I described earlier, typically with you starting with a fairly mundane activity, such as collecting payments from nearby farmers, and then learning that there is some sort of issue, like a pump has been stolen out of their shed, and you have to go track down the bandits who stole it, which kickstarts a whole fight, and then you find out some more information that progresses the story at the end of it. And this is fine because it is progressing the story and it is engaging. There is gameplay to be had here. There's even specific things that tie in to later plot points, like you might see one character make an offhand comment about this or that, and that ties into a later thing when initially what was just a concern ends up justifying their betrayal later. So it's not like it's a total waste of time, but it is very repetitive and formulaic for sure. In chapter 4, titled Il Baron, you get to go and accompany Isabella and Gennaro Fontanella, the Baron's son, who's very wealthy and has a brand new car he's very proud of but can't drive, and you ride to a nearby group of ruins. While on horseback, you also have some dialogue and witty banter with Isabella, and it's clear that their relationship is growing even stronger. It's here we get to use the camera for the first time and try to take a photograph, but soon after using your camera, you get to the ruins and seemingly have a nice time before a bunch of bandits orchestrated by a man named Messina, who's a former Fontanella partner, kidnaps them, presumably in some desire for something like ransom. He kidnaps Isabella, the daughter of a nearby Don, and then also, of course, the son of the Baron, who he could also fetch a hefty ransom from as well. And this kickstarts what is probably one of my favorite sequences in the game. It's just very Uncharted-esque. It reminded me of the sequences in like Uncharted 4, where you're chasing like the trucks and everything, or you're chasing after Sam as being chased through Madagascar. I really like this kind of thing. I like big set pieces. I like cinematic stuff, and I had fun with it, though I will say it's frustrating. I just don't like this type of like boost based horse riding. I like stamina based horse riding like Red Dead Redemption 2 has. And I understand there's many other games that do horse riding like this. As you can see, you have the 3 little boost options in the bottom right. You tap RB, it boosts the horse for a little bit while they surge and you can get a little closer. But I just personally don't love it. I will also say that a lot of these sequences, they don't do a great job of maintaining the illusion that this is up to you and your actions will dictate how this turns out. Very often you can feel the rubber banding. And if you don't know what that is, it's like they want to make sure that you're always close enough to keep the race interesting or keep the chase interesting. And so they'll have the thing in front of you that you're chasing after, whether it's the first place person in the horse race or car race, or in this case, the buggy and wagon that you're chasing after that has Isabella and the Baron's son inside. And so they want to maintain a certain distance. So at some times it'll go faster if you're surging in speed, and other times it'll go slower if you're starting to lag back behind. And it's a tough balancing act that is really, really difficult to manage. just frankly is. It's why it's so remarkable when Naughty Dog is able to do it, where if you mess up, you end with a mission fail state, but it does ultimately feel like your gameplay, your choices, and your skill in that moment is what's determining your success in this mission. In this case, I felt like it was literally just a matter of me going through the motions. It's like, okay, that collapsed. Okay, I ride up here. And so long as I don't die, I should be good. And that just kind of breaks the illusion and makes it feel less magical. But I still really like this sequence. I think it's more a testament to how good Naughty Dog is at this stuff than a criticism necessarily of Hangar 13. It's just a really tough thing to pull off. But speaking of tough things to pull off, I mean, the smooth transition between cinematics and gameplay is something that comes up repeatedly throughout the game, and it's really well done. It just is. It's really, really well done, and I'm always impressed by it. It's something I remember first seeing in Red Dead Redemption 2, I believe, that smooth transition. It's also God of War 2018 did it as well. And it's just so cool. It's so well done. I don't know who the first ones to do it really would have been if I'm thinking off the dome, but I just love to see it even in lower budget titles and smaller projects like this. Seeing those types of quality of life improvements is really, really cool. We get further character building, of course, between Enzo and Isabella, ending with a kiss. And this, of course, establishes that things are getting hot in here. And it was at this moment where I was like, okay, so they're not going to live happily ever after. This is going to end badly. It's like, I call it a sense of dread. You know, I was just like, there's no way this ends happily. There's no way. But you can see, of course, Cesare is there as well. And they further build their relationship as well, because Cesare is going to be important later. In the following chapters, we find out that the kidnapping was actually part of a broader plan by a former associate of Fontanella, and the Don sicks you on him like a dog. It's at this point we get prompted to select some weapons and then go out for the mission. This is the gameplay sequence that was shown before launch. It gives you a good idea of what's possible, both in terms of gun combat and then also stealth sequences. And it works pretty well, but this is also one of those moments where I feel like we can talk about this. They give you the option to select weapons for the mission specifically, and it's something you can go and do later in the game for other missions or other times where a chapter may start at the villa or at the vineyard. And then you can go straight to the objective and there will be weapons there for you to pick up off the ground or something if combat breaks out. Or you can go and select the weapon from the guy at the vineyard. And it's always an option. Same thing with going into your home and swapping out clothes from your wardrobe. That is always an option, but the story never really gives you a break. This is something a lot of people have had frustration with Mafia, the old country, is that it's pretty unrelenting in its pace. And that makes for a really compelling story that always has something going on. It never really starts to lag behind or feel slow and sluggish. But the point more broadly is just that there aren't breaks for you to do typical TDM, whether it is swapping out cosmetics and outfits and stuff, or even something as simple as customizing charms. This is a replay of a chapter that is later in the game, chapter 13. And you can see even at this point, I still hadn't upgraded these charm parts. It wasn't because I didn't want to, or I was trying to be like, get good, go crazy. It was just literally because I never really had a time to go to Pasquale's store and do the upgrade. I didn't know when I was supposed to. Even at this point in the story, like, I'm going and taking a body to go and put in a grave, and then I'm immediately tasked with going somewhere else and doing another activity. And I think most people will just go from activity to activity and quest objective in the top left to quest objective in the top left. And they're not going to pause and be like, okay, hold on, Tino, hold on. I need to go and get another bead for my rosary. I just don't think most people are going to do that, because the game does a really good job of immersing you in the story and in what's going on. And it doesn't ever feel like you should go and just like get distracted with some busy work or other elements. I understand that they didn't want to have the open world and they didn't want to just be like, go make yourself busy and come talk to me when you're ready. But I do think maybe a few points in the story like that would have been helpful before like some big quest begins, before some mission, you have a character literally tell you, go take a breather, drive around the city, maybe go change your clothes. They could make an offhand comment about your clothes stinking and something like that. And then it just pushes you and forces you into going back and swapping things out. And, maybe more quests that specifically require you to go back to Pasquale could also help. There are a couple of instances where you specifically go back to them and they're like, oh, go talk to him before we move on. I think that happens once, maybe twice, but we're talking about a 12-hour game. And in that 12 hours, I didn't really feel like I had the opportunity to upgrade my rosary like at all. So that, I think, is a problem. I'm genuinely interested in how this worked for other people, if other people managed to get it done and find the time to do it as well. I'm genuinely curious because they do have a decent sized map. As you can see, I mean, we've got the vineyard, we have Pasquale's store, we have San Celeste with Enzo's apartment there specifically. And down here we have another gas station specifically with a garage and stable. And there's other things in the game as well that I feel like were once much bigger deals, such as the gas tank. You see in the bottom right, there's a gas tank. It's because in previous Mafia games, you would run out of gas. Like you had to specifically go and refill gas. It's just what you had to do. In this game, like I played through the whole story and I never once had to worry about gas. I have messed around in the car cyclopedia mode, which is what this is, where it's basically free roam and you can just drive around exploring the map, and like collectibles can be found this way and all sorts of stuff like that. And even then, I haven't in a session of this needed to go and refill at a gas station. Maybe I'm just doing it wrong. Maybe I'm too conservative of a driver when it comes to my fuel usage, but I do feel like there are multiple things like that where you can just completely ignore it and it never comes up. It's not relevant at all, whether it be fuel or whether it be the upgrades with the charms and stuff. It's just not really a big deal at all. And it's too bad because things like that, the simulated gas or the charms specifically, this is such a cool way to customize your character. Like this is genuinely so cool and it's just not really used hardly at all. And it's just too bad because I think it's really interesting, but I guess we'll have to wait for a sequel. I guess this is also as good a time as any to just call out and specifically compliment the beautiful recreation of Sicily. I mean, they did such an incredible job. It's kind of ridiculous. It is an Unreal Engine game, so it can look really good in screenshots, of course. In movement, it tends to get a little more jarring with pop-in or stutters and things like that. Thankfully, I have had pretty much no bugs or issues. I had one graphical issue later in the game, but a reload very quickly fixed it. And that really is the only time I've had a problem, whether playing on my laptop or through GeForce Now or on my big gaming computer, which I'm using right now. I think the game looks pretty dang good, and it actually runs surprisingly well considering how rough it looked at certain points in the marketing materials. And I mean, the recreation of the city, of the villages, of NPC activities and everything is pretty gorgeous. The one way I've heard it described before, and I got this in a few comments and stuff, and also in the live chat on stream the other day, is that some people said it's really good just so long as you don't look too deeply into it. Like, again, if you don't expect Grand Theft Auto 6 levels of simulation with NPCs, you can have a really good time and it's beautiful. But if you look any deeper, you'll start to see the illusion breaking, and that's definitely true. Other people have called it like a theme park recreation of a beautiful city, which might be a little harsh for like what I would consider, because I do think it has a lot more specific historical inspirations, but I do think that they did a really good job recreating this, and it's just gorgeous. It's just gorgeous. Look at this. Like, look at these statues. It's specifically like a lot of the architecture, the buildings just look so pretty in this like sunset lighting. It's just gorgeous. It's gorgeous. So good job on the team for putting together a really beautiful recreation of San Celeste and the whole map in general. They did a really good job. I'm eating it up. Anyway, what I was saying is Enzo goes, he finds the guy that was ultimately responsible for the kidnapping ploy. They kill him and put his body out for everybody to find and see. And then Enzo is officially invited into the family, and they host the whole ritual where he gets sworn in with a blood oath and becomes a member of the family officially. And this is just a really cool sequence because it is apparently a very grounded historical recreation of what this would have actually been like for a mafia family swearing somebody into the family in this period in Sicily, which is pretty cool. It's pretty interesting. And I gotta say, it is cinematic as and now that he's officially a member of the family, he gets tasked with even more big boy jobs and responsibilities, such as helping set up a counterfeit operation. The deal is that you're going to send counterfeited US dollars to Empire Bay, and in exchange, the people in Empire Bay who are associates will send things back like American-made guns. There's a few quests tied to this, a handful of breakout missions, and you even run into Alhambra in jail in this quest line as well, which alludes to a future betrayal that will come from it. And in chapter 7, we have a small nod to the first Mafia game with its infamous racing mission, which at the time was next to impossible to get through. But in this game, it's, I think, actually probably fairly difficult to fail. Again, it's the rubber banding thing. I haven't tried the race 10 times to test like how bad you have to be to fail the race, but it felt so easy. I was like, I don't really want to go through that again. And it's too bad because I'm like, you got a decent racing sim here with the cars. Like, they're pretty well realized. They did a lot of historical research on how they would have steered, the grip, the traction, the acceleration, all of that. And so I feel like you could just open it up and let it be just a total like free-for-all race. Just let the player race against some AI controlled cars and see what happens. But instead, because I think there's specific dialogue tied to certain moments in the race, they scripted it. And so it just doesn't feel that dynamic. It just feels like you're going through the motions, which is true of a fair number of these types of sequences. I like how big budget it seems. I like how exciting it is that the whole city is watching this race play out, but I just would have liked it if it felt more challenging. In the next chapter, the tannery where the counterfeit operation was being housed is overrun by police. And this is because police were tipped off, most likely by our friend from the jail a couple of chapters before. Enzo and Cesare kill him, and they set his body up to make it look like it was a car accident or like he was drinking and driving or something. But anybody who thinks about it for 2 seconds can figure out it probably wasn't an accident. All of this frames the broader tensions between the Spadaro family and the Teresi family. And to the Baron, it's becoming increasingly clear that the two families will not play nice together and probably can't coexist. One of them will have to be put in charge of the whole valley, and the other one will need to go off quietly into the distance or perish. Foreshadowing. In chapter 9, you are tasked with going to a factory that's been shut down recently due to a union strike, which seems very out of character because the man that Don Teresi has put in charge of the factory is not one to be too friendly with unions, let's just say. So Enzo goes and investigates, finding the Don's man dead after a beating, and it turns out that it's actually all just an ambush by Il Merlo, the same guy whose face you cut earlier. A fire erupts in the factory, the whole thing burns down, gunfights ensue. There's another, say it with me, knife fight. But when all is said and done, it's clear that tensions have escalated even further. Though it's important to note that at this point, there's even more dialogue from Tino, the old man who's like right-hand man to Don Teresi, that alludes to the idea that Tino does not trust Enzo. He thinks something's up. He keeps calling him a Caruso. He's no good, a filthy boy, a mine boy. You know, he can't be trusted. He's not worthy of being within the family. And I think that may come up again later, which I appreciate that they planted the seed of his suspicion early on. Like, even in the first couple of chapters, Tino's making references to how, like, don't get a big head on your shoulders, Enzo, like, you're just a Crusoe at the end of the day, stuff like that. I appreciate that they laid the foundation for him being suspicious of Enzo because it'll come up later. But now we get to probably my favorite chapter in the game, I think, and that is chapter 10, La Festa. Now, the reason why this chapter is my favorite is twofold, I think. For one, it's just beautiful. It's a beautiful recreation of a Saints' Day festival in Sicily in this period. Gorgeous and very well realized. And two, because narratively, it's where things really step it up a notch, and the intensity is just crazy. Not only is it just high stakes, but things get wild. There's also a small-ish detail that is in an optional bit of dialogue that completely like haunted my mind for the rest of the game that I'm going to show you. It's the day of Luca's infant son's baptism and also the day of a Saints' Day festival, a big celebration where the whole city gathers and feasts, and it's a day of peace and camaraderie. You get to go to the church in San Celeste with Isabella, and along the way, naturally, you have conversations about the life you want to live together. There's also a moment where you get to break off and look at various vendors who are selling Italian cuisine or even little flowers, and you can buy her one to give her once you choose to engage with her and speak with her to move the story along to the next cutscene. However, before you do this, there is an optional bit of dialogue you can listen to. There are these guys called Cantastoria, and they are effectively storytellers. They point to pictures and paintings and recall a legend or a fairy tale or something. And in this case, he retells a tale which sounds all too familiar. So I will just let it play out and I'll be back in a second.
With my heart and my voice, I shall tell you a tale of a forbidden tryst and an impossible love. In old Sicily, there lived a maiden of noble birth, hair black as jet, and eyes like rising suns. She nurtured the garden, verdant and full. The aromas intoxicated all who wandered by, drawn by the perfume. And Moore was stunned to see the maiden. At once, he declared her beauty unmatched. He returned the next day, bearing gifts for her garden. Enchanted by words and charm, the maiden became overwhelmed with desire, and the love blossomed. The pair spent blissful days together in the garden, with their love growing ever stronger as their hearts became entwined. The thought of being apart became impossible. All thoughts of anything else left their minds, blinded by passion. The maiden and the Moor saw not the danger that their union posed. Diverted by love, the maiden's garden became overgrown. Is she ill? Lost her mind? Broken a bone? Hearing the news of the garden's plight, the maiden's dear brother came to see what had transpired. Rather than finding his sister dead, he was shocked to find a stranger in her bed. Enraged at the perceived dishonor, the brother drew out his sword. One cut, then two, and the couple were sent to the law. The lovers' heads were turned into faces and raised up in the garden. But they remained as ever, side by side. The brother's soul never recovered from guilt, but our couple remained forever in the garden they built.
Yeah, after I heard this, I was like, there's no way Enzo or Isabella survived this game. Like, there's no way. They're in love, a forbidden love, and something's gonna go terribly. And I was trying to figure out who in this, like, analogy or simile or what have you, who would be the brother who discovers his sister. I was like, who could that be? And I didn't think it at the time, but I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be Cesare. And yeah, it's when I heard this story, I was like, there's no way they're surviving. This is going to end very, very badly. So I had this impending sense of doom and dread for the rest of the story, which maybe you're supposed to feel, or maybe you're not, and you're supposed to be like genuinely hopeful there will be a happy ending. But after hearing this, I was like, there's no shot there's a happy ending. There's just no way. Now, I tried to hunt down and find out if this is based on like an actual Italian tale or proverb or something, and it looks like it is. There's a bunch of different versions of this retelling. Basically, there's a tale that actually is the reason why you'll see all of these like decorated heads in Sicily, and they're always made in male-female pairs, and it goes back to this legend as is described here. They say the legend behind these figures comes from the 11th century when the Moors dominated Sicily, and like so many legends, is supposedly all the fault of Cupid. One day, a girl who lived in the Arab district of Palermo, the Calza, was taking care of some plants and flowers on the balcony of her house. Suddenly, a dark-skinned merchant, a Moor, as is referred to, you know, by the actual name of the legend. They came and passed by and immediately fell in love with one another. They began their love story together until the young girl discovered that her lover had already had a wife and children waiting for him back in his home country. One night while he slept, the girl, crazed with jealousy, thought of a way to make him stay with her forever, and without blinking an eye, she cut off his head and decided to use it as a vase to grow her basil in. Beautiful. It's a beautiful love story. As people would walk by her balcony, they began to become jealous of her thriving basil, and so they began creating colorful vases with clay heads. Today, there are many different styles of ceramic heads, but the most traditional are of a man of color and a beautiful girl. And this is the most common version of the story. There are stories where her family decides to kill him because he was not like allowed to marry her because she was either of a high social society class, whatever, or because he was a Moor, and so that's not allowed. And then there's other versions of the story where they're both killed by her family. It's all over the place, okay? So I think they loosely looked at that as inspiration. I haven't been able to find a version that exactly matches the game, but this apparently is where that legend started. So there you go. Anyway, after you listen to the story and collect the flower to give to Isabella, you have a brief conversation with her where you establish that you want to escape with her and start a new life, probably in America. But then you go into Luca's infant son's baptism. That takes place. And then after the baptism, everybody goes outside and poses for a picture. However, at this point, it all goes bad.
Get yourself a girl. Will be your son soon enough.
Signore? Step forward. Assassino!
Go! Go! Get inside! Spadaro bastard! On a holiday!
Luca, keep them safe.
Find the gunman! I want it fucking him! I'll cover you! Don't Parisi, stay there! I'm come zero!
Yeah, it happens quick, dude. It happens fast and it goes bad real quick. But what plays out is, again, a very Uncharted-esque sequence. You stealth from table to table as the sniper is shooting at you, breaking things apart, and it actually like is pretty cinematic and cool. There's even this part where you push over the statue in order to get cover for pushing up even further, and it's just really cool and well done. I just thought this was awesome. This bit here was like straight out of Uncharted, where you're pushing this up and then it transitions seamlessly into a cutscene. You don't even realize it yet. And then Cesare gets shot and injured, and so he can't push it anymore. It's all just, it's very well done. I love this kind of thing. It makes me realize how much I miss Uncharted. I think the story here is frankly better written and performed than Uncharted's typically has been, but man, I eat it up. I eat it up. So anyway, you push on and then it kickstarts a whole pursuit sequence where you are trying to get the would-be assassin, though he did definitely kill a guy. And once you get up there, Say it with me now. There's a knife fight, of course, against Il Merlo once more, playing out all over again because that's just how this works. You have another knife fight before eventually, beating his ass a little bit and, then getting your ass beat and thrown down. And Luca comes in to save you right before Il Merlo comes and gets the jump on you. And then we get another very Uncharted-esque sequence where you're running across the rooftops through the city, chasing him, going in and out of buildings. I mean, this was cool. This reminded me of AC Unity back in the day. If you remember, like the free running in that game also had seamless transitions into buildings and stuff. You could go into somebody's kitchen while you're running around. It was pretty cool. And here you see all sorts of people celebrating. And what I appreciated also is that as you push through the city chasing this guy, people are far enough away that they didn't hear the gunshots, or they're firing fireworks, so they didn't, of course, hear the gunshots or think that the gunshots were anything bad. And so they're just celebrating as you're chasing this guy down. And the backdrop of the countryside and the vineyards, it's just beautiful. Like, this was something I didn't even expect to get out of Mafia: The Old Country, but I'm here for it. I really ate this up. I love this kind of thing. I love big set pieces and cinematic combat. And I love when it pairs specifically with a beautiful recreation of a city like this, because it gives you a reason to explore the city in a way you never would typically. And it's also grounded narratively. It makes sense within the story, and it's action packed and cinematic. I just love it. I love this kind of thing in games. I don't know why. I really like it. And then after you catch up with him, there is, of course, again, another knife fight. And, you go slash, slash, slash. He escapes again, but then you continue chasing him. I thought this move was also just cool, where you jump on top of like the actual, I don't know, do you call that a float? Do you call it I don't know what you call that. That thing they carry around in like these ceremonies. I have no idea. Anyway, you continue chasing him. The fight continues and continues and continues. It eventually turns into a horseback and car chase, which suffers from the same problems as the others, where it has some like weird behaviors with the horse where it'll just stop sprinting because you got close to some object that it didn't like. And they also rubber band pretty heavily back and forth, so it kind of lowers the stakes. Like, running through the city was really intense, but then you get to these sequences which you'd think would be even higher stakes, because you're literally on horseback chasing somebody in a car driving at full speed like through the countryside. But I felt as though this actually lowered the energy and intensity because it was so on rails, and it didn't feel like, my driving of the horse or riding of the horse was the operative element in my success. It just felt like, okay, ride until the next checkpoint is reached and then something happens, which is different than like Uncharted. In that famous sequence in Uncharted, for example, that was shown off at E3 2015, I believe, where Nathan Drake is climbing on the back of that car. He's being dragged behind it as they race through Madagascar. And I remember at the time everybody saw it and was like, there's no way this is real. Like, there's no way this is actually running in real time, but it was. And it was really cool because it was on tracks technically, but it also was dependent on the player fighting their way through all these waves of enemies, jumping from car to car. And if they didn't do that, they would fail the mission. However, in a lot of these sequences in Mafia: The Old Country, it doesn't feel like the stakes are that high. It really does feel like if you just continue riding, you're going to eventually catch up. The next checkpoint will be reached, and then it'll play out the way that it was set up to play out. It doesn't really feel like you need to be good at racing on your horse or on the car. It's going to play out the same for everybody. Again, I just feel like it's too easy. And speaking of too easy, of course, there is... Say it with me now, once more. One more time for Il Merlo. Right there. Boom. Of course, you get the jump. And then knife fight. Another one. This is like the third one with this dude in the span of 5 minutes. But this time it's personal. This time it's serious. It's actually going to end here, which is probably overdue. At the end of the fight, though, he gets the jump on Enzo. Enzo drops his knife and he starts choking him out. And of course, like, he's not going to die here. Enzo doesn't get to die just yet. And so he is saved by Luca, who shoots him dead and saves his life once again. I was trying to like rack my head for the reason they set it up this way, where he's a savior once again. And I think like it's possible it is some like nuanced narrative consideration, or it's some allusion to some folktale or legend of a savior that saved you twice or something. But to me, it really just feels like they needed to reestablish that the player should really appreciate Luca and should really love him and cherish him, so that what happens next hurts more. I think like they set it up that way instead of having like Cesare or some other character show up. They wanted it to be Luca so that you would specifically be hurt by what happens next. That's my suspicion, at least. In the following sequences, we see the Baron show up once more, speaking with Don Trisi, and it's made very, very clear between him and Don Galante that the violence can't continue. Like, they can't keep doing this. If they continue fighting like this, war is just going to continue erupting, and the military will even get involved, which again brings up an interesting wrinkle to Mafia stories, which is that the Baron is making money through illicit means, but he can only make money allowing these criminals to do all of these unsavory things, getting a cut of it, so long as it doesn't make a big enough splash that it gets the attention of the guys that will actually come in and clean it up and then discover that he's doing this. So he wants to continue making money by having them pursue these criminal enterprises, but he can't have the military involved. Like, he just can't. So if he views Don Teresi as the agitator or aggressor, or the one that's causing the most drama and can't just play ball, then he's got to get rid of him, because if he gets the military involved, it's going to screw up a good thing for everybody. And this kind of lays the foundation, this scene right here, for what's going to come later, which is that Baron Fontanella clearly sees Don Teresi as an emotional man, not as a pragmatic, level-headed individual. He feels like he will fire off. He's too emotional. He takes things too personally. And on the flip side, Spadaro, who they're going to have a meeting with to settle this beef, he is much more level-headed and willing to just do whatever he needs to do to keep making money. He doesn't care. He's probably too unemotional. So it sets the stage really nicely for the final act of the game and how the rest of this plays out. And it's followed, of course, by yet another scene of Enzo and Isabella saying how they need to get out, they need to escape. Isabella says she wants to finally escape. She's had enough and can't stand living involved with all this, wondering if Enzo's going to come home, if he's going to die randomly like anybody else that they've seen, especially with the assassination attempts and everything else. So she's justified in feeling the way she feels, but again, the sense of dread is only increasing more as the stakes continue to rise and the tension builds between the two crime families. You accompany Luca and Don Torrisi to meet with the other rival family members and try to settle everything nicely. That's at least what you believe is going to happen, because Spadaro is going to be there along with Don Galante and the Baron, and the idea is that they're going to talk it out and they're going to let bygones be bygones. No more bloodshed, no more assassination attempts. They're going to set it all aside, stop the fighting, stop the warring, and move on. And you can see Spadaro is not really seemingly that excited about the conversation, neither is Don Teresi. But the scene that plays out is one that initially, when I first saw it, I thought kind of came out of left field. But the more I've thought about it, I think the more it makes sense to me. You see, what happens is that Spadaro basically explains, with the help of the Baron, that Don Teresi is being pushed out. He'll be offered fair market value for his assets and everything, and Spadaro will effectively take control of the entire valley, including the vineyard. He'll take over everything, and Teresi will be booted out. And I thought this felt really out of left field. Like, why is the Baron doing this now? Why does he not want Teresi, but he wants to work with Spadaro, who seemingly is much more chaotic and hectic compared to Teresi, who at least appears more measured? While I initially thought it was really out of place, I think it literally just comes down to the fact that Spadaro is kind of a useful idiot. He's kind of like reckless, sure, and he's like a mad dog, but a mad dog is pretty easily controlled with some beef and some liver and some treats. You can control him so long as you have the thing that he wants, which in this case is money, he'll do what you need him to do as long as he gets what he wants. Whereas Don Teresi, the Baron makes a couple of allusions specifically to frustrations that he's turned the vineyard into his home, that he seems to have some desire for more. He's kind of speaking out of place. He's maybe gotten too big for his britches and forgotten that he is a small cog within the Baron's machine. He's not on the Baron's level. And you see the Baron pleading with the Don, asking him to accept this and don't stand in the way of progress. And, you know, he's pleading in these sort of vague ways, but it becomes all the more clear why the Baron was pleading with him in just a moment, because he didn't want things to turn out the way that they were about to. Don Spadaro says it's an opening position and that he's open to negotiate, but that he's going to step out and talk with the Baron, even though he already knows kind of how this is going to go. And what plays out after this took me by surprise. I wasn't ready for it, but perhaps I should have been. You see the Baron kind of put his hands up and just accept that this was beyond his control. Interestingly, he doesn't even look at Don Galante, who specifically is the one that was ensuring the peace of this meeting and making sure everything would be non-violent. And we see perhaps why he didn't want to engage with him or look at him after, you know, Spadaro leaves, causing pause. Everybody's like, why would he leave? What's this? That's kind of weird. And then all hell breaks loose. They kill Don Galante and start shooting everybody. And what ensues is a pretty hectic and chaotic sequence, I'll tell you what. Luca is shot in these opening moments, and you proceed to work through waves upon waves of enemies fighting from room to room, trying to escape. And I will say it's a beautiful recreation of this fishery. You know, if it weren't covered in blood and guts of humans, it would almost seem tranquil. But it's just like a shooting gallery galore throughout this whole sequence. And I think it was this sequence where I really started to just get annoyed with the shooting. It's really basic cover-based shooting. It's nothing that's going to like wow you. It's serviceable. And that's true of a lot of the gameplay within Mafia: The Old Country, is it's literally just good enough to get the job done. And in this case, that's also true. But I think at this point in the game, it also starts to approach the point where it's just kind of frustrating, where the guns don't behave the way that you expect them to. They aren't dealing as much damage as you thought that they would, and it's just kind of annoying. And whenever a gameplay system starts to feel annoying or frustrating and like you're wrestling with the controls, it's not good. So that was unfortunate, because the rest of the sequence is so high intensity that you'd hope that it would just keep the stakes up and keep your blood pumping and everything. But instead, you just kind of end up feeling like you're wrestling with rifles and shotguns the whole time. I think this is backed up also by the fact that it's not particularly difficult. Like, you can still headshot and kill enemies with relative ease. There's always ammunition. There's always healing items. There's always stuff for you to find to make an encounter doable. And even sometimes the AI isn't that great, as you just saw in that instance. But it's not particularly difficult. Like, the snap-on is relatively strong. It's not the most aggressive that I've seen in a console game, but it's also not the weakest. And I felt often that I was more going through the motions in these sequences than like actually fighting for my life. It wasn't difficult. I just had to go through pop, 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 pop with each and every enemy. And that kind of made it feel less intense. You know, if I wasn't actually scared that I was going to die and lose progress or something, just kind of made it so you got to go through step by step, work your way through the crowds. You fight your way out with Don Teresi carrying Luca on his back, and are eventually able to load him in the back of a truck that Cesare brings, and you narrowly escape the pursuing attackers. And then we get another Uncharted-esque sequence of shooting trucks and cars that were pursuing you. At one point, I was so frustrated with the controller, like analog stick aiming, that I just said screw it and I grabbed my mouse. And you'll probably see the moment there I grabbed it and I just started like popping headshots with my mouse instead of trying to use the analog stick. And it made this whole sequence kind of like a joke at that point, unfortunately. And it's another example of how I think the game is, for one, too easy, and I think it also it can suffer at the altar of like these railed sequences. I don't know how I missed that guy so many times, but it's like the game would be way more intense if it were more difficult, and it would be way more, I think, immersive in these moments if it were more difficult. Because as you can see there, I pop an achievement for destroying 10 cars through this whole sequence, but then even more cars show up. The sequence isn't anywhere close to over, so it's like they didn't expect me to be able to kill the drivers as fast as I did, which is weird. So I just think it needs to be more difficult. That's my takeaway. I think it needs to be harder. They eventually arrive at the docks where there's a bar and cafe, which is a safe house for them. They run inside and put Luca on a table as they run off and try to find a doctor. However, inside, it's clear that Luca's wounds are mortal. I think the Don accepts this before even Enzo does, as he goes and stands at the bar, and he's not with Luca in his final moments. And I think it's because he was already accepting the reality of it. But specifically, Luca asks Enzo to get out of this life. And this is particularly important because when the mission is starting, you go to speak to Luca to hop in the car to go and take the Don to the meeting. And he's speaking with his wife, Valentina, about their infant child and family that he needs to be there for. And she says, this is a bad idea. Like, you could die, you could get hurt. Why are you going? You need to prioritize us, the family, more than this and the family and the egos of everybody else. And he's like, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. And so to see Luca dying after all of this, especially with the backdrop of Isabella and a revelation that's going to reveal itself very, very soon, it's something that's going to stick in Enzo's mind and that he's going to mention multiple times. The following chapter is what's probably known as the all is lost moment, where nobody is safe. Enzo's freaking out, not sleeping. Neither is Cesare. Everybody's panicking because everything is going terribly and they're being hunted by Fontanella and by, of course, the Spadaro clan. And so they can't even ride their horses on the main roads. They have to travel in secret, worried about getting ambushed and taken out. But I will say, this was a moment where I was able to go to the wardrobe and they specifically asked you to get changed, which Mafia 2, for example, did a lot. They prompted you a ton to do that. And in this case, it happens a couple times, maybe a few times throughout the entirety of the game. And in this case, you can see I pop on my suit. I finally started looking at hats and hairstyles because I hadn't really had a chance to do it yet in my entire playthrough of the game, because I was always just mission to mission. I was like, oh, this is happening. Okay, let's go deal with it. I never paused to like look through cosmetics. You see, look outside, make sure everything's okay, and then continue on. And this is actually where I ran into my first and only real graphical bug in the whole game. I was riding with Cesare through to the vineyard, and you see this weird thing starts happening where basically my understanding is that a mesh somewhere in the distance is being misunderstood in the engine and is being stretched out to an extreme degree. That's at least how somebody explained it to me. It could be something else as well. All I know is that it was really jarring and distracting, and I was like, I don't think I can record this sequence for a video if this is happening. So I just reloaded from the previous checkpoint, and after that, there was no issue. It's literally the only time I ran into something in the entirety of my playthrough. And after that, it was totally fine. And I didn't have any problems after that. As we rode through to the vineyard, I didn't have this happen again. I know other people have had a lot more technical issues with Mafia: The Old Country. I somehow have not, and I'm typically a bug magnet, but I wanted to point that out because that's the one time I saw something happen. The following sequence is pretty rough. You get to see the Dawn looking over Luca's body, and Cesare walks in with Enzo, and it's interesting because Don Teresi specifically says that he wants to speak with Enzo, and he has a task for Enzo, not for Cesare, but for Enzo. And so he casts Cesare out, and he explains effectively that they don't have much of a choice left now. The only way that they have a chance at survival is to take out the Baron and or Spadaro at the same time. They're going to be meeting at an opera house in the city. This is the only chance they'll have, and it's kind of all or nothing. And he's having Enzo do it specifically, which I think is interesting. And I've gone back and forth over this, and I was like, is this because he thinks Enzo is the only one he can truly trust, which I believe is what Cesare believes it is? He thinks that the Don doesn't trust him for such a serious mission, which is perhaps true. But it could also be that he views Enzo as dispensable, as somebody he can send on effectively a suicide mission, and it doesn't really matter because he's, at the end of the day, still just a Caruso. And I think it may be a little bit of both. I think it may be that he doesn't think Cesare is capable of it, and he also thinks that I'll send Enzo to do it, and if Enzo dies, it's not going to be that devastating. It's not going to be that big of a deal. I can live with that. It could be both, but I did think it was an interesting, very specific choice that the Don tasks Enzo with this instead of Cesare or one of his other men that's worked with him for even longer. Naturally, Enzo agrees to do this, but he's intercepted before he leaves by Isabella, who has a conversation with him where it's revealed that she is pregnant with his child, of course, and that they need to escape now, and they need to do this now before everything goes bad. And Enzo casts her aside and basically says, no, I gotta do this. I have to do this for the family. You don't understand. And I think in one way she makes an offhand comment that, this is not the man that I fell in love with. The man I fell in love with would leave with me right now for our child's sake, which is perhaps true. But I think later he says specifically that he didn't know what to say. He was overwhelmed. He didn't know what was going on and how he should react, which is easy to say after you already did the thing she was upset at you for doing. But I think this scene is just so interesting, and it frames their relationship in sort of a haunting way that will be important later, that I will discuss when we are talking about the endings, because this scene I think has a lot more potentially to do with the ending than you may initially think, specifically with how it frames Enzo. But after you agree to disagree with Isabella, to say the very least, you speak to the driver, and then you head off to the big city. And this is where we get the first taste of what like Mafia 4 could look like if they did a direct sequel to the old country or something. You see these massive buildings, you see the huge set pieces, the crowds. It's just a beautiful recreation of the city. And I think it's also really interesting because you don't get the chance to explore it. It is totally linear. They are not letting you explore the outside of the opera house. It's not a black box mission where you got to figure out how to get in. It is on rails and is linear. But I think that that's okay. And I think it allows them to show this grandiose scale and spectacle of the opera house and the set piece. And it works really well. But it gets me excited at what a big, like full budget, dare I say quadruple A Mafia game could look like. It could be totally wild. There is an important scene between the Baron and Spadaro before the opera kicks off. It's established, for one, that they're both going to be there in the royal box directly across from the stage, which will be useful for figuring out where to kill them. And it's also established that the Baron has not yet signed over the papers to Spadaro, and the Baron has some like misgivings and is kind of hesitant with all of this, suggesting perhaps that he plans on double crossing Spadaro and having him arrested or something. I don't know. Like he was using him to clean up the Teresi problem, and then he'll have the military come in and clean up Spadaro or something. I don't know. We don't really get the time to find out because we're going to kill them both before they have a chance to explain further. But now that we know we need to kill two people in positions of power and high stature within society, we go to the only place you go when you need to perform an assassination, which is a priest. So you pay them off and he leads you down underneath the city into the catacombs, where you will access the opera house through its basement. What ensues are pretty basic stealth sequences, nothing remarkable or particularly interesting given what we've already seen. You then find your way into the opera house and start stealthing through the backstage section while you listen to the opera singers singing like right next to you. I just thought this was cool. I like when games do this kind of thing, like they have some regular activity that you are doing something nefarious within. I just think it's cool. You collect some collectibles while you go through it as well. Unfortunately, this is also really, really easy. It feels like this should be where the game has been building. You have to utilize all of your skills and abilities all at once in order to get through it and perform this really difficult assassination. But that just isn't how this plays out. Instead, it's really basic stealth. You wait for the two guards to finish talking, and then they separate, walk the other way, and then you just crouch and walk across the floor, climb the ladder. It's no biggie. Even once you get into the boxes and you start seeing where the guards are specifically watching out for somebody like you, they're all standing pretty much with their backs to wherever you may be, and you can like watch the opera singers down on the stage and stuff, which is kind of cool. You see the crowd and everything, but it's really, really basic. And again, it's just frustrating to see that such a climactic moment story-wise is so lackluster in the gameplay department. But eventually you find your way to the Baron and you are able to assassinate him in a bloody and very obvious way with the body falling over the rail. It's a cool moment, and surprisingly, it's one that was also spoiled in the trailers. I was genuinely shocked to see how many of these sequences, even at the very end of the game, are used casually in the trailers. It just seems weird to me. I get that they wanted to showcase some big set pieces and stuff, but I feel like they could have left some stuff unshown, you know? They didn't need to reveal everything. But either way, it's a cool moment, very cinematic, very dramatic as he flips over the railing down onto the floor, straight out of a Mafia movie, shocker. And the screams ensue, the audience clears out, and then you're tasked with chasing down Spadaro. The next 10 minutes or so are just running through waves and waves of enemies, shooting through them, picking up a different weapon, shooting through more of them, looting their bodies, grabbing a grenade, shooting through more, running to the catacombs, chasing down Spadaro and his personal bodyguards, getting through more catacombs, and then eventually finding Spadaro in a locked and enclosed space for, say it with me, a knife fight. This one actually did introduce some more hectic, I think, behaviors on his part. At least I sensed that he was fighting much more aggressively, far more attacks chained together and stuff. It's still the basic slash, break his guard, working very similarly to the combat of old Assassin's Creed games where, oh, they're blocking, break the block. Oh, he's attacking me, I can parry, or it's an unblockable attack, in which case I dodge. It's a system as old as time. It's fine, it's serviceable, but again, this is like a really climactic, crazy moment, and it just feels like the knife fight, the boss fight, is like kind of underwhelming, and it should be really, really exciting. So again, really cool moment narratively, kind of underwhelming in terms of gameplay. You eventually do get the jump on him and are able to kill him in what I think is actually one of the better performed death sequences in the game. Just this moment of like disgust on Spadaro's face, and then this moment of like genuine surprise. I think when he realizes that he's being killed by a Caruso, he's like genuinely shocked by it. And then Enzo like wipes off the bloody blade. It's just badass and hardcore. And this moment here, I thought, was a real big missed opportunity. Personally, he sees this gold ring on his hand, and obviously, like, the insinuation is he needs to pull this off to maybe prove to the Dawn that he actually killed his target. It could spread through the news, of course, and it would eventually, but it might take a day or two to reach them back at the vineyard. But earlier in the game, there's a moment with Cesare. You see, you just cleared out a bandit camp and you're told to clean up all the bodies. So you pick them up and you throw them into a well, a concept that doesn't come back into the game at all. But you go, you pick up the bodies and everything. And one of the bodies that's picked up and is brought over by Cesare has a gold ring on the finger. And this was also something shown in a couple of the trailers and gameplay previews as well. And it's interesting because Cesare can't get the ring off his finger, and so he is like pulling and pulling, as you can see, and then he gives up and just pulls out his knife and literally just cuts the dude's finger off because he isn't gonna need it, he's dead, and takes the ring off and then tosses the finger into the well. And it disgusts Enzo, and he's like, what is wrong with you? Genuinely shocked that you would disgrace a body like that. And I thought that this was such a missed opportunity because Enzo, the whole point of these Mafia games typically is that you take somebody who was a good person at least in part, early, perhaps very naive. And then you show how they steadily get corrupted as the game goes on and as the story goes on. And this was the point of the scene earlier with Isabella, is that she's like, the man I fell in love with would not risk his life like this so regularly for another man's ego. He would run away with me to protect me and our unborn child. You're not the man, like insinuating, you're not the man I fell in love with. And so I thought this was a moment where Enzo could have struggled to get the ring off and then chosen to cut off his finger to get the ring off. But instead it just pops off and he takes it. I understand maybe they thought cutting the finger off would have been too on the nose or on the finger. I don't know. But I thought it was such a missed opportunity, and it could have been a really cool moment to show how Enzo had kind of become that very thing that initially disgusted him back in like chapter 3. Or maybe I just like fingers getting cut off and I have a thing for it. I don't know. But now that the Baron and Spadaro are dead, it means Don Torrisi is the new king in town. You make your way back to the Don and you give him the ring, proving that you actually did complete the task, which again, cool moment. Give him the ring so he can see that he actually did it. He gets a little memento to prove that he was the better of Spadaro. But it just feels so bizarre that they missed that opportunity, cutting off the finger. Anyway, if I ever get the chance to talk to one of the writers or people who worked on Mafia, please answer that question. Why didn't he cut the finger off? I want to know. But you see, the Don is smiling for the first time in a very long time since you won the race practically back, 6-7 hours ago. And he says that he's very proud of Enzo and he's kind of smirking. He's pleased. He's pleased with him. He did right by Luca. But something interesting happens here. And I don't know if I'm just reading into it too much, but you remember earlier I said that I felt like maybe the Don views Enzo as disposable, as somebody that isn't really part of the core family, probably because he is a Caruso. He's not really on their level. This kind of reiterates that same feeling. As Enzo's walking away, the Don just off the cuff mentions, "We buried him, by the way." Speaking of Luca, while Enzo was gone, they buried Luca without him involved. And you see that even Enzo is kind of like, really? Like I understand I was off doing this, but like I thought it was a family event. Like I just personally felt like it was weird that they specifically buried him without Enzo there. It wasn't important that Enzo was there because he's not part of the family. Like he's just a grunt. And so the fact that he was not involved in that, didn't get to be there to be part of it, just shows further that he was still being viewed as an outsider by the Don, even after Enzo literally just killed the Don's enemies and saved the Don's life, really, and his livelihood and everything. And he still is not considered on the same level to even get to attend the funeral of his own mentor. Again, maybe I'm just reading too much into it, but I'll let it play out for you now with the full audio and everything so that you can make up your own mind, because the music even shifts in the background. So don't just pay attention to like Enzo's face and to the Don's face when he reveals that they buried Luca, but listen to the music shift as well. I feel like it was an intentional thing to be like just a little twist of a knife that he wasn't even allowed to be there for the burial. Watch it and then let me know what you think in the comments.
We buried them, by the way. Up at the chapel. Go pay your respects when you're ready.
We now are headed into the finale of the game. In chapter 13, we are cleaning up the last strands of leftovers from Spadaro. He has a few holdouts, some of his hired hands and grunts that have run off into the hills and set up camps to try and hide away from Torrisi, and you are tasked with killing them and cleaning up. This basically just serves as a gameplay break, sort of a moment to catch your breath after the high intensity and cutscenes of the previous chapter. And it works pretty well. I mean, you basically go and you're tasked with killing 2 or 3 guys that have gotten away. You clear out their camps. and you move on. But the important bit happens at the very end of the chapter. Costa, one of the guys that you've been chasing, has been hiding out inside of a church, and the priest, who you've seen multiple times throughout the game at this point, basically says this is a place of peace. Like, it's a freaking church. You can't kill someone here. You can't do this. And so when you kill Costa and the body drops, you see the priest is disgusted by this and is not going to tolerate it. When Tino comes up and basically tries to put him in his place, brings him back inside the church, and it's insinuated that he's going to kick his ass for daring to talk back to them and letting him hide out within his church and not being loyal to their family, the Teresi family, despite, you know, literally being a priest. No one's saying Tino's a good guy, right? Like, nobody's gonna think that. Nobody's gonna be confused by that. But this is important though, because the priest is the one who is receiving the confessions for the entire town, for everybody. And so he's got a lot of dirt, which makes him very valuable to the family. And Tino, I think specifically, is choosing to engage with him here, not just because he wants to punish him for guarding one of Spadaro's men, but also because he wants to know what the priest knows, because he has had it in for Enzo since the beginning and is looking for dirt and has been very suspicious. There's even other dialogue from Isabella in the previous chapter alluding to Tino's suspicions and that he's been walking around searching for stuff, like he's a hound sniffing out clues, like he feels like something's off and that he can't trust Enzo. This almost certainly goes back to chapter 8 when Enzo and Isabella are beginning their tour d'affaires and they're sleeping in Enzo's apartment when Tino starts knocking on the door ferociously. And this is revealed to be because it turns out the counterfeit operation has been compromised and you have to go and save it. But you see Tino break in and he's like yelling at Enzo for leaving him standing there. And he looks around and he sees 2 glasses for wine sitting on the table. And he's like, who's been here? Who's been here? Almost like he's suspected this, that there's something. He opens the door and Isabella has somehow managed to break out and he doesn't see her, which establishes her ability to stealth, which will be important in just a little bit. But you see, even Enzo is surprised. He's like, how did she do that? How did she get out? It's because she's good at it. But you see Tino kind of pausing and looking around and thinking, and then he calms down significantly. And I suspect that maybe Tino had noticed that Isabella was not at the vineyard, and he's thought there's something fishy with her and Enzo. Enzo's always riding with her, taking her places, serving as her like private driver and stuff. And so I think Tino was suspecting that maybe there was an affair for a long time. And so in this moment, he started freaking out because he thought maybe he had caught him finally. And then she's gone. There's nobody there. The bed is made. Okay, I guess I was wrong. And he calms down. But I think he suspected that there was something going on, which is why he wanted to speak to the priest. Because if something was going on, chances are a good, godly woman would have confessed it to the priest. And if he can beat up the priest enough, maybe he can get that dirt out of him. But anyway, back to the present. That night, as Tino's working on the priest, Enzo and Cesare and everybody, they end up going to the local brothel and they drink and party and hang out. But before long, Cesare slips away with a woman of the night and Enzo is left talking to Leo, who he's been working with to prepare his escape plan with Isabella. And you can see inside are tickets for a ship to escape to the new world. It's actually happening. You can see on his face right there. He's like, I could actually do this. Get there, go to the address on the envelope. You'll find his cousin. You can get away, start your new life. It's actually happening. There's also multiple lines of dialogue during the sequence that allude to Enzo's absence. It seems like over the last few weeks, since they've been wrapping up all this stuff with Spadaro and the Baron, Enzo has been largely absent-minded. Enzo has a couple of lines of dialogue where he specifically says that he went off to reassure associates of Luca's and even friends of Luca's to tell them, we're still in business. Nope, the Spadaro stuff, it's not a thing to worry about. He's gone. Still work with the Teresi family. We're in charge now. He says he was on business doing stuff like that, but it seems like it was raising suspicions significantly that maybe he was plotting some big escape and something was fishy. Something was going on. And this is the first moment where I feel like we're starting to really deal with what I would say is a contrived, forceful push towards a specific ending, where it feels like Enzo's behaviors are not in character. I understand he's excited to escape to America, but it feels a little on the nose to leave an Empire Bay postcard pinned to your dashboard and to have been largely absent for weeks and not aware of the family business and not being like on top of all of it and being very cold and shut off. And it's so much so that multiple characters over the beginning of this chapter, the final chapter of the game, will make comments about Enzo being distant and not involved in the business. And that to me just seems like such an obvious screw up for Enzo that he'd be like, no, I need to pretend like things are totally normal before I escape with Isabella. I need to be more present. I need to be very active. I can't all of a sudden be acting like a recluse in a shutout. But apparently not. Anyway, you pick up Isabella and you take her in your car to finally escape to the new world. You hop in there and you drive to the train station where you are going to take the train to the nearby port and then hop on a boat and ship, I guess it would be more like, and escape to America. And in the car, when you finally arrive, there's a little moment that's important that I alluded to at the beginning of the story discussion where Enzo gives Isabella a letter, which will be important in just a little bit, and also a carved horse out of wood that he says is just like the one he had when he was a boy. It's just really, really sweet. It's a sweet moment and a sweet little memento to give to his child. But I will say this moment, I understand why they had to do it this way, because Enzo, unfortunately, spoilers, is not going to get the chance to give her this letter again. And so he has to give it to her now. But it did feel a little strange that you're trying to run away. You're this close and you're going to pause in the car with all of your business associates, everybody else around the town potentially seeing you, and you're going to chat right now. Like, it just feels weird. It feels weird. Again, I understand why they had to do it this way, but it feels weird. And I will say this moment, my heart sank. I knew exactly what was about to happen, because if you look right there, Cesare is standing right next to the chests. You can see the shirt unbuttoned, the sleeves rolled up, the hair slicked back. Immediately, I knew what was happening. And again, it feels like Enzo would be even more aware than I would be right now. It feels like Enzo should be on edge. Like he should be hyper vigilant, hyper aware, but instead he's just holding her hand very openly, like they've already made it out. And that just doesn't feel right. Again, it feels like he got really, really careless. Spoiler alert, if I was ever going to run away with like my beloved in a very, very dangerous situation where my beloved is the daughter of a crime lord who has no problem killing people for fun, much less for a reason like sleeping with his freaking daughter behind his back, I would probably set up a dummy plan. I'd probably be like, I'm not even going to tell her in case something slipped out. I'm going to make a backup plan, and we are going to go to the other train station down the line, another hour drive away. And we're going to like pull a pivot, an audible, or maybe we're going to hop on a boat, a fishing boat, and ride that out. And we're going to be hiding underneath the fish until we're like an hour away. And then we'll get out and hold hands and chuckle and look at letters and carved horses. It just feels like all of a sudden, all the caution and all of the smarts that Enzo has had for the whole story is cast aside in this last chapter because the writers needed Enzo to get caught and to die, and he couldn't be smart enough to avoid it. And I feel like that just goes against everything we've seen from him so far. Like, he literally assassinated a baron in an opera house within a city that was under military control. But he didn't think that maybe word had gotten out while they're holding hands and smooching in public. Like, what are we doing? What are we doing? Again, it would be one thing if Enzo were established in the story to be kind of like reckless and stupid, that would be one thing. Like Ellie in The Last of Us Part 2 gets in trouble because she's reckless and doesn't think things through before she's doing them. She's just filled with rage, and as a result, she gets in trouble. That makes sense. That's justified in the story as her character has been written and established. For Enzo, though, I feel like his whole character for the whole game has been carefully calculating. He is way more capable than people have given him credit for. Everybody practically underestimates him, including the Don, which is why the Don's so impressed when he keeps surpassing his expectations, to the point where he tasks him with assassinating a freaking baron and rival crime gang lord, you know? But then again, in this last chapter, it's just Enzo, he goes full stupid mode because we needed him to go full stupid mode, and it's just frustrating. I understand Tino is brilliant, and Tino saw this coming. In fact, later, we'll actually get to see a letter from Tino written to Don Teresi, where you can actually read the correspondence back and forth while they planned what to do with Enzo. So they had known for a day or two that this was happening, but you can see they collect Isabella and Enzo. Enzo is going to be taken to the mines to be dealt with by the Don personally, and Tino says that they're going to pursue arrangements they've made to eliminate the pregnancy. And I think what they say later is scrape any trace of Enzo out of this world, which is pretty messed up. I'm gonna say it. It's not nice. It's mean. The sequence that follows, where you're riding in the back of the truck with Cesare, is one of the most well performed, I think, in the game. It's very well done. It's subtle, but it's literally just Enzo pleading with Cesare not to do this and to help him save Isabella and to just not do this. He's just pleading not just for his life, but for his child's life. And Cesare is just having a full-blown mental crisis and crisis of self, because this life is all he has ever known. All he's ever done is follow the orders of the Don, of the family. He took the oath, and he will live by the oath and die by the oath. It's all he has ever known, and it's all he wants to know. And so he doesn't understand how Enzo could do this. Enzo was promised ownership of the mine you are returning to just a little bit earlier in the chapter. The Don literally tells him, because you've done so well, I'm going to reward you with the mine where you came from, but now you'll run it and own it. Like, you will basically become a Don like me. That's basically what he was promising him. Like, the Don's in charge of the vineyard and Spadaro was in charge of the mine. Enzo's being given control of the mine for doing this amazing work, getting rid of the Baron and Spadaro, and he's gonna throw it away. And Cesare just does not understand how you could possibly do that. Like, what is wrong with you? You could have had everything. You had everything. But regardless, you're walked up to the offices of the mine, and in the distance you can see the volcano billowing with smoke. They make multiple comments about how it's smoking and nobody should be at the mine. It's too dangerous. The volcano could pop off at any time now, but they're there anyways. And this is something that's reinforced a few times. Once more, is that the Don is emotional. He doesn't think straight when he gets riled up, and he can make major mistakes, even life-threatening or devastating mistakes, because of his emotions. It's something the Baron thought, and it's why he was going to side with Spadaro, and it looks like he may have been right in this case. This was a nice little detail though, but as you walk in, you'll see the door right there, and if you pause and look at the nameplate on the door, Enzo Favara is listed on the door. They actually put his name on the door, which I just thought was a nice little detail and touch, that all of this is going to go down in what would have been Enzo's office if he had stayed and accepted the offer of the Don, but given up Isabella. And you go in, and the Don is there pacing, already livid. Cesare just stands off on the side as the Don instructs him to untie his hands, because he wants to kick his ass, mano a mano. And it's just, this whole sequence is pretty devastating. It's pretty devastating. It's a rough watch. And one of the accusations that's been levied against Mafia, the Old Country story, by people I've spoken to in our Discord, which is for members and Twitch subs. If you're not in there, you should get in there. It's an awesome time. But what I've heard from people is that this whole ending of the Old Country feels kind of like misery porn, which is what The Last of Us Part 2 is. It's a game where they just are trying to make you depressed and everything's horrible and everything's awful. And they're even willing to betray the virtues and morals and ideals of certain characters in the pursuit of just making things more miserable and more awful. I don't think this quite crosses into Last of Us 2 territory, but it does certainly feel like they had made up their mind relatively early on in the writing process that they wanted Enzo to be discovered by the Don and by Tino and Cesare, and this was going to be revealed. It wasn't going to go over well, and this was not going to really be a happy ending. Like, Enzo was not going to survive this. Like, I don't know, maybe I am just like particularly frustrated because I really wanted Enzo to make it out with Isabella and like get to Empire Bay, and then we find out that we're setting up like a full-blown remake of Mafia 2, but it's going to be like slightly tweaked to be more in line with Mafia, the old country. I don't know. I don't know what I was expecting, but I feel like I've made a decent case for Enzo's behaviors in this last chapter being out of character, and it's only going to grow more frustrating because there's one particularly damning instance here in a moment where I feel like they just really wanted him to die and forced it pretty hard. And we're going to talk about contrived endings at the end of this discussion, at the end of the video. But this like frustration of inevitability that you're feeling is very justified, I feel. The Don demands that Cesare needs to be the one to kill Enzo, and right as Cesare is about to do it, popping the knife, you can see that the volcano outside erupts, or begins erupting, because I think eruption is a long process. I don't know anything about volcanoes. But Enzo pushes him out the window, and they have, say it with me. You know you want to say it. Say it with me. After all this, you know you got to say it. A knife fight! Yeah! So we have a pretty heartbreaking knife fight against Cesare, where he doesn't want to kill Enzo, but he has this obligation for the sake of the family to do what he feels he needs to do. He's always had this commitment to the family. It's the only life he's ever known. This is what he must do. Like, he doesn't know any other way to live life than to do what the family demands and the patriarch of the family demands. But the fight continues until eventually Enzo gets the best of him and has the opportunity to kill Cesare and escape. And it's in this moment that we have like the good guy moment where Enzo chooses not to kill him and to let him go, because he's saying, I'm gonna stop with this, all of this. I'm done. I'm gonna live my life for me, and I'm not gonna do this. And he even has a line where he specifically says, you know, you shouldn't live your life for the ego of another man. You know, live for yourself. And it's a sweet message, okay? But letting Cesare live represents a major, major risk to Enzo and to his ability to escape with Isabella. And that shouldn't be, and I don't think is, lost on Enzo. And my argument for why it's not lost on Enzo is because when he goes through the door, it's not like he trusts Cesare now. He still thinks he is a major risk and danger. So he actually goes and puts a wooden beam on the door to lock him out so he can't pursue Enzo anymore, because he doesn't trust him, because he thinks there is a serious risk that Cesare could continue pursuing him and maybe even like kill him and you know, undo all of this progress that he made by escaping the Dawn and getting out with his life. So I feel like leaving him alive after Cesare just spent a few minutes trying to kill him just feels weird. I understand wanting to be the good guy and being like, no, we're gonna be better. But like, this is maybe not the time for chivalry. Your beloved, the future mother of your child, has been taken and kidnapped, and they are threatening to force an abortion on her to terminate the pregnancy of your unborn child. Like, this is not the time for fifis and cuddle sessions and like, I forgive you. It's the time for like, get out of my fucking way. You know, like, I feel like if this were me, I would be ripping his eyeballs out with my thumbs and popping them in my mouth to see if it gave me extra energy to like pursue anybody threatening my beloved. Like I cannot fathom being like, okay, yes, she's been kidnapped and they're about to kill my child, but live for yourself. Like, no, stop it. Shut up. Go. You know? I understand the need to sometimes pace stuff and like have moments of dialogue that have a little more flow and rhythm to it. I get that. I totally get that. But I just feel like both thematically and in execution in this sequence, this is not the time to be chill. Like, this is the time to go panic mode, get to Isabella as quickly as you possibly can. You fight through a few waves of enemies and you try to make your way out of the mines. Thankfully, there is a lot of dialogue in here, specifically from these grunts who are like, we should not be here. What is the Dawn thinking? The volcano is erupting. Why are we chasing after this random Caruso? Like, he's been banished from the family. The volcano will probably kill him and or us. Like, what are we doing? Which is very fair. And I appreciate that the dialogue is there, even if it's just quick lines of dialogue thrown off in between combat encounters, because it does make a difference and it does make this feel much more reasonable and grounded. Because it's always been a frustration of mine where like you'll be playing a game and you're literally like fighting as hell opens up underneath you and the enemy grunts are just like charging in like nothing's wrong. When anybody would be like, why are we here? What are we doing? This is a bad idea. But thankfully in this case, they don't do that. They actually have lines of dialogue where they're like, I don't want to be here. What are we doing? It's better than nothing. I'll give them that. You then find your way back into the mine shafts and you're working on getting your way back out of the mines on the other side. And because you spent a lot of time in your childhood here, let's just say, you know these mines backwards and forwards. So you're able to find your way out. But before long, you run into Don Teresi, who's found his way into the mine shaft and starts shooting at you. And this kickstarts his boss fight to wrap up the game. And you know, I could be a pedantic little prick as normal and be like, how did he know how to get down to the mines and navigate these to get in there? But I think it's probably fair to say that after Spadaro like got killed, Don Teresi knew that he would be taking over the mines until he gave control of it to Enzo. And so he probably went on a tour and learned how to get through the mines. So he probably knew these decently well and had recently been given a tour. So I don't think it's that big of a deal, frankly, that he was able to navigate his way through here. But in the following moments, you can see as you go through the mine shafts that all of these gas leaks are starting to erupt. And if you blow them up, it lights them on fire and it can deal damage to enemies really, really easily. And you can pick up lanterns and chuck the lanterns into that, which may be important in a minute. But before we get there, you get through the tunnel, you see a stairway, and you literally see light at the end of the tunnel. But this is precisely when we need to have our obligatory jump from the boss that comes in and starts speeding you up. He has a pretty cool line about crawling out of this hell to bring sin upon his family, which I thought was a good line. And then you get in this little scuffle, but we see those gas lines and the lanterns come up once more. This little surge of flame that you see with the gas as it blows into the cavern, it's something that Gaetano mentions in the first like 5 minutes of the game. If the flare surges, then you know that gas is there, and it comes back here with the flame igniting. Enzo chucks the lantern, it explodes the cavern, and it collapses seemingly on Don Teresi. But if you've ever played a video game before, you know that they can't have the final boss fight end that like unremarkably. So you push up through the cavern and you find your way out to a very beautiful vista view. It's the same area you may have crawled out earlier in the game, and you see the volcano in the distance. Enzo is trying to keep himself together with all of his injuries, and he knows he needs to get to Isabella, but again, because this is a video game, we can't be doing that. That would make too much sense. So as you run, the ground gives out underneath you, and then we go through a doorway, waddle around, looks shockingly like a boss fight arena, because it's a boss fight arena. And of course, you know, we see, you know, more projectiles coming from the volcano, but we have to have our final boss fight. We have to. The Don can't die under a pile of rubble. That's not how games end. And Enzo turns around, and sure enough, he made it out. And now they have to fight. Now they have to fight with, say it with me, a knife fight. And that's what happens. That's how this ends. I will say the knife that the Dawn is using is a particular knife that you can get if you go to the shop. And it is a knife specifically for brawling. It's like a hardcore crazy knife. And so I thought it was befitting of the Dawn that he would use that particular knife. He's not using a throwing knife. He's not using a knife for like careful parries or durability. He's using a knife that messes you up. You know, I thought it was only appropriate. So the fight ensues, but eventually they are able to end the scuffle with Enzo stabbing the Dawn in the gut and finishing the fight. And there's a few little lines of dialogue here that are particularly interesting, so I'm just going to let it play out and we'll circle back in a moment.
You could have had it all.
I have everything I need.
So demanding. Look at me. Look me in the eye. You can't change what you want. You're nothing.
Enzo. Just you and me. Like we said.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Yeah. This is a frustrating one for me. I'm not going to go into the full details of why I find this so frustrating until we get through this last little bit to like wrap up the whole story of the game, because I want to talk about it all in the context of itself. But yeah, I found this frustrating I found it frustrating, and I will explain why momentarily. First, let's talk about Isabella. After this, we snap forward to Tino talking to Isabella. She's pleading for him not to do this and to let her live with her child, but Tino simply says that's not how it goes. You dishonored your father and your family. This is how it must be. However, after he leaves, you can see Isabella starting to look around the room, and it was at this point that I realized what was happening, and I was like, oh, hell yeah. Okay, we might actually have hope for a happy ending, but I swore to whatever God was responsible for this game that if they did all of this and then still killed Isabella, I would commit crimes. I was like, you can't do this. Like, kill off Enzo and then swap to Isabella, be like, play her now, and then kill her off too. If you do that, I'm gonna scream. But there's a bunch of little interesting tidbits in this sequence. Love letter from Enzo, some other collectibles and things that you can find, including the hairpin, which is useful and a nice little touch, because earlier in the game, Isabella broke into Enzo's apartment and used her hairpin, that same one, and it was left hanging out of the door. And so it's a good little touch that's how she could break locks and pick locks. They established earlier in the game that she could do that. You didn't even realize they were establishing that, but they did. Also, her ability to stealth just generally was also established earlier when Tino burst into the room looking for whoever was in the room with Enzo. And I just love how they planted all these little seeds that come up later. It's just a really, really good touch. But as the following sequence plays out, you see Isabella climb out from under the desk, and on the desk is a letter from Tino. And it's this letter where you can actually read the discourse that they had over this whole drama with the child. As you can see, I confirmed their plans with Father Ciccone. He is a man of God, so I trust his words. If you want Cesare to go with me, I will not argue with you, but you know my thoughts on the matter, which suggests that maybe the reason that Cesare was not given as many opportunities is specifically because Tino doesn't trust him, not necessarily because the Don doesn't. Because of course, Cesare was sent with Tino, which suggests that maybe the Don was like, okay, well, Cesare, we're going to need him to like start climbing the ranks after Enzo's out. So you got to take him. But still an interesting little tidbit there with that line here is that he doesn't seem to like Cesare, but the fact that he still went shows that the Don thought he had potential, which is interesting. As you can see, Fede and Carlo will take the truck. The first train to Palermo arrives at 12:45. We will be there before. Keeping watch from a distance. The Caruso will get what he deserves.
Tino.
And it's such a subtle touch. But again, calling him a Caruso, it's something Tino's been calling him the whole game. And it comes back once more. They still calling him. But again, this is why I'm saying it would have been important to have a dummy plan. They figured out from the priest that they were going to escape on the train because Isabella told the priest in confessional that that's what they were doing. For some reason, she told him the train that they were taking and the day they were taking it. I don't know why you would tell your priest that, but I'm not Catholic. I don't know what you guys do. Maybe you share your schedules with the priest. I don't know how it works. But anyway, that's how they found out. I would have had a dummy plan, and I'm not very smart. Like I'm not. And even I would have had a dummy plan that I would have swapped out at the last second, because that's like espionage 101. Like if you want to have a secret plan that goes well, you have a dummy plan and then the real plan that actually is the real plan, but nobody knows it except you. And I would have thought that there would have been a conversation between Enzo and Isabella to be like, hey, maybe don't tell the freaking priest what day we leave and on what train we're gonna go. Like, what are we doing? Anyway, I'm sorry. I'm riled up because I'm frustrated, but we'll talk about it more in a second. Over the following minutes, you stealth as Isabella out of the vineyard as the volcano continues erupting. There's even more dialogue from guards about how stupid of an idea this is. They're like, hey, the world is literally ending and everything is exploding. Should we really be hunting down a little girl and trying to like force her to get an abortion? What are we doing? And it only gets more dramatic as time goes on because the volcano only begins to erupt more violently. But anyway, Isabella works her way through the cellar and is able to escape, or at least it looks like she's about to escape. But it's when she's jumped by one of these guards that is trying to hunt her down. And when that happens, she is forced to do something she'd never wanted to do. She's forced to use the knife to defend herself and her baby. And she actually, takes matters into her own hands. I don't blame her for this. I don't feel like this is a symbol of corruption or anything, which might be some people's interpretation. But I feel like this is pretty clearly a sign or a case of self-defense. He literally took out his blade to attack her and her unborn child. I feel like if ever there was a time where bro gets to get stabbed, that's it. So I think you did great, Isabella. Snaps in the chat. I think you did great, honey. But you see, she gets out of the cellar, and then we have another stealth sequence to get out of here and get into the garden. And if you remember that bit of dialogue in the tale that was retold outside of the chapel before Luca's infant's baptism, part of that dialogue was specifically that the couple in question was going to be left in the garden forever. Together, but dead. And then this happens.
Signorino Torisi. Get out through the garden. It's the only way. Grazie. Don't let them see you.
So when she says go to the garden, I mean, I feel like this was pretty clearly like, hey, go to the garden. Nothing bad will happen there. And I was like, Cesare just killed Enzo. I bet you, and this is all happening in my mind in the span of like half a second while I'm staring at this moment right here. I was like, I bet Cesare is going to bring Enzo's body back into the garden, and Isabella is going to see it. She's going to be killed by something in the volcano or something. I don't think they'd have Tino or somebody kill her. I don't think she would take her own life or something. I don't think that would make sense. So she'll probably die from the volcano, and then she and Enzo's bodies will be in the garden forever, together, but dead. I thought that was how they were going to tie together this prophecy and this tale and everything. So from this moment on, I was like, please no, please no, please no, please no. If that happens, I'm going to be pissed. And so I just want you to enter my mind space as we go into this, okay? You have another short stealth sequence before you get to the other side of the garden where you go through a doorway. You see the black bars show up, which means you're going to get jumped by someone because that's just how this works. And of course, it has to be our friend with the deep, dark, gravelly voice. Wait for it. The one and only Tino. He shows up, he's taking matters into his own hands, literally, and he's going to take her to the doctor to see this through. All of the guards are making allusions to how this doesn't make sense and how they shouldn't be doing this. The world is literally ending. A volcano is erupting and destroying everything around them. Why are they so concerned with taking her to this doctor? What are the odds the doctor will even still be there? Like, is this a doctor that lives underground? What are we doing? And here's my suspicion is I think that they had this whole bit designed. I think they had this idea of a really cool visual of the volcano erupting and that lights everything on fire. And it's a really cool climactic visual, right? It gives a reason for the mine being destroyed and for everything feeling very cataclysmic at the end of it, right? Like the whole world is falling down around them. Literally, it's burning down both emotionally, narratively, and then literally in the physical space. So I think it makes sense. The problem is it's not just about thematics. It's not just about the cool art and visuals. It's also about what the characters would or wouldn't do. I understand that Don Torisi is emotional. I understand that, and he's reckless. I understand that Tino is all about the family and loyalty and keeping the omerta and all of that. I get that. But at some point, I feel like if literal hell is descending on Earth, that even the most emotional among us will go, okay, just shoot him in the face. And you know what? We'll get you the abortion tomorrow. Let's go on a boat and get away from here. I feel like that is a way more realistic reaction, which is why the ending can start to feel contrived, which is why it starts to feel like the characters are behaving in unrealistic ways to achieve a specific ending that was desired, independent of what was actually justified by the characters that had been written up until this point. And that's what we're going to discuss a lot when we get to the very end here in just a second. But I think that this is just another indication of that, where like literally guards now are starting to leave the campus and leave the vineyard, and there's guards that you hear dialogue of like, we shouldn't be here. But I think that that was probably a later addition to patch this over, because they probably did have playtesters or people that they looked at, or they even looked at it and were like, it really doesn't make a lot of sense why they would be staying here. It really doesn't. So let's have dialogue that it like acknowledges that, which is good, because you need to acknowledge it. It doesn't make sense why they would still be here. But I don't think that just a couple of lines of dialogue that aren't acted upon by the characters is enough to cover up the fact that some of these characters are doing things that just don't really make sense. I understand the desire to, in their words, like wipe any trace of Enzo from this earth, to take her to the doctor and have this erased effectively. I understand why they're saying they want to do that. It makes sense with those characters' motivations, why they would see that as the most reasonable thing to do. But it doesn't seem like a reasonable thing to do when literal hell is descending on earth. So I think it's important to mention that that's part of why I think some people started to check out at this point of the ending of the game, because Enzo was just killed in a way that they felt was not really justified given the way his character acts and behaves. And then now we're also going through a sequence where other characters like Tino are behaving in bizarre ways like this, you know, chasing her down even as everything literally burns down around them. It's like, is this really what's most important right now? Maybe it's symbolic that it is what's most important to them right now, but these are guys that are all about family and money. And it feels weird that that's just completely lost on them now, and it's just all about forcing her to get to the doctor, you know? Anyway, what ensues is a stealth section, which I'm just gonna be real, I really didn't like this part, not because like narratively it was so frustrating, but also just because mechanically it doesn't work too well. The line of sight isn't super clear, and Tino's movements and behaviors are fairly sharp, meaning that he can very quickly turn around and grab you before you're out of cover. It's just like kind of immersion breaking when that happens. You're like, okay, well, I could have seen that coming. Could have seen that. And you know, it's easy to get through once you realize kind of how it's working, and that he stops for maybe like 2 to 3 seconds and then he'll keep moving. And so you just kind of have to recalibrate your brain. But I just didn't think this sequence was particularly well executed either. Another indication of like, if you can't do something well, maybe don't do it at all. But yeah, slash sucks to suck, Tino, sorry. But after you've dealt with this enough times, you stab him 3 times, you get him in the collarbone, and he throws you over his shoulder, but it's done enough damage and he just drops dead, and no one will miss the bastard. But here Isabella gets up. She's like, okay, I can get to Enzo. We can have her happily ever after. I actually escaped with my baby. We're okay. She's behaving realistically. Her behavior makes sense with her character. She's willing to kill or be killed to get out of this. So she opens the gates, hops on the horse, and this is precisely when Cesare shows up. And to my surprise, Enzo's body was not in the car. He left it behind, so it's not going to end up in the garden. So I took a little sigh of relief. And Cesare doesn't say anything, which is interesting. Instead, he just walks up and hands her the envelope that contains the tickets for the ship. And Isabella immediately knows what this means. She immediately gets it. Like, the only reason he would have this is because Enzo is dead. And he says, there's nothing for you here now. You need to go. And she tries to collect herself. She takes it. And then she's going to leave. And he doesn't do anything. He just walks past her, looking at all of the destruction and what the family has brought symbolically. They didn't literally set the volcano off, but she hops on the horse and then she heads out. And I think that this is fascinating. The way that this plays out is fascinating. And we're going to circle back to it in a second, because I think that there is a way to interpret Cesare's behaviors where he's not actually like just the evil bad guy. There's actually a way of interpreting this where he's actually really, really helping Isabella the best way he knows how, but we'll get to that. After that, in a healthy fade to black, we see Isabella on the deck of a ship, and it's nice and moody, cloudy, overcast lighting, and she's reading the letter that Enzo gave her. Remember I said earlier he wouldn't have the opportunity to give it to her again? Well, yeah. But for this, I need you to just listen to it and hear it for yourself. So enjoy.
Amore mio, we'll remember today for the rest of our lives. It's the day we chose a future for our family. My father left me for dead. Our child will live how they choose. Just knowing that makes everything we've been through worthwhile. I can't undo my past, but you helped me to rise above it. And for that you have my love, my loyalty, forever. Enzo.
Now, I'm going to be real. I genuinely do like that they got Isabella out, that they allowed her to escape with her unborn child, and they play like the Mafia 2 theme song at the end when Empire Bay comes into view. It gets me excited at what they may be doing next, that they might do a direct sequel to The Old Country following her and her son or daughter's story. I think that could be genuinely really, really cool to see how maybe these games tie together, because all of these games tie together in very direct ways. It may not be super obvious at first, but they almost always, not almost always, they always do. So it's no mistake that they started playing that Mafia 2 theme when they showed up to Empire Bay, for sure. But we have to talk about this ending to wrap up this video, because it is far and away the most polarizing element of the game at this point, and I have some thoughts. The first point of discussion is obviously the predictability of the ending itself. There's the dialogue outside of the church where the old man is retelling the tale of the doomed couple that ends up dying in the garden and never leaving, and as a result there's this omnipresent sense of doom and dread throughout the entire story from thenceforth. Also, even before that, because simply the element of common sense when you try to evaluate whether or not it's a good idea to father a child with a mob boss's daughter behind his back, it doesn't exactly take a genius to figure out that that might not be a good idea. And so in a lot of ways, Mafia: The Old Country ends just like a lot of other Mafia stories, in almost exactly how you would expect it to, though maybe not precisely. Our hero dies not because of his greed necessarily, going back for the money in a mine that's collapsing, but rather because of his willingness to dispose of his greed. He ultimately succumbs to a familial betrayal, just like the one he is guilty of. I'm not saying that like Cesare impregnated him. I'm saying that like he betrayed the family, and then, you know, that caused his death. You know what I mean? I don't need to explain this. Okay, I'm moving on. As I mentioned earlier, I thought that they were probably going to follow that tale or legend to a T, that they would both be dead in the garden at the end of the game to live together forever in this haunting way. But color me surprised when she was permitted to live with her unborn child in Empire Bay. But I use the word permitted to live, permitted. I use that word intentionally because I really feel like a lot of the ending of this game was constructed and contrived, and that's what makes it feel inorganic and rigid and artificial, which is particularly jarring because the rest of the game is so well written and so emergent from the characters themselves that the ending feels so out of place. It feels so forced. In that final moment with Enzo, it feels like Enzo trusts Cesare in that last moment with the hug in an uncharacteristic way, just so that he can open himself up to the assassination. And that's a problem because his death feels undeserved. The ending therefore feels cheap and needlessly dark. After all, we've just spent the whole story following our leading man, and for him to be killed off in a way that doesn't feel justified makes the player feel as though they've been robbed of a more grounded or true ending. It feels like after all of this, everything that Enzo has gone through, he would be much more skeptical of Cesare and would not be willing to expose himself in that way, to just hug it out after they just fought a few minutes ago, almost to the death. You could say that he trusted him because if he were an actual threat or wanted Enzo dead, he would have just come in and helped the Don kill Enzo, and then he would have no doubt been rewarded for it by the Don. So the fact that he shows up right after the Don is killed perhaps indicates that he let Enzo kill the Don so that they could escape together. But I could also flip that to the other side and say that if he wanted to save Enzo and escape with Enzo, he could have just helped him kill the Don. After all, nobody would have seen it. The volcano was literally exploding at the same time, and they could have escaped together after killing the Don hand in hand. So I don't think you can say that Cesare actually was all of a sudden trustworthy to Enzo because he didn't help kill him. He also didn't help him kill the Don, which could have also led to Enzo's death. So at the very least, he's like unbiased on the sidelines, waiting to see whether his boss or his like brother ends up dying. Like it's just that doesn't get you out of it. The point is, no matter which way you twist it, it just doesn't seem like Enzo should have been willing to trust Cesare so readily, especially because they were both just trying to kill each other minutes before this. And again, I'll remind you that Enzo didn't trust Cesare either, which is why he put the literal wood beam on the door to lock him in there. He didn't trust him minutes ago. Why would he trust him with a hug now? You could say that Enzo was trying to be selfless and lead by example of love first and let's hug it out, bro. But I would say he's also trying to get to his beloved before their unborn child is ripped out of her. So it's not really the time for hugs. The point of all of this is just that trusting Cesare so instantly and getting stabbed as a result of it, almost literally in the back, feels contrived because it is. I don't think Enzo's character would have done that. It doesn't really make sense given what he had done for the whole game and what he did literal minutes before he went in for a hug sesh. It just feels weird, and that makes his death feel out of place, unjustified, and cheap. I'm not saying they couldn't have killed Enzo off. I think there is an outcome where maybe there's a final boss fight against Cesare or something, and he comes to finish the job. I think that could work. You know, I think that there is a way you could have Enzo die where it doesn't feel cheap, but I think this felt cheap. Now, I also want to clarify just real quick that I don't necessarily or inherently have a problem with contrived or forced plot points in stories. A lot of incredible stories force their characters into specific situations. Hell, any story that involves a prophecy or something like that is literally built around contrived scenarios and writing characters into a preconceived conclusion. My problem with contrived stories and plot points comes when it becomes disconnected from the characters themselves and their motivations. All stories are ultimately contrived, after all, if an author is trying to craft them with an ending in mind. Some authors will literally just start with characters, give them motivations, personality traits, etc., and then see where the story goes. And it can certainly lead to some interesting outcomes, as you can see for yourself in a lot of Stephen King books, since he has openly discussed writing using that philosophy of characters first and outcomes second. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's right for everyone, and certainly some authors will craft a story with an ending in mind, which I think is what happened here. We heard the tale of the couple doomed from the start of their love, and that effectively serves as a prediction or prophecy for where the story is going, and then the characters were written into that outcome, with the slight modification that Isabella was allowed to escape to Empire Bay with the child, so that it wouldn't be just a totally miserably, helplessly depressing end. My problem is just specifically that it feels as though Enzo was forced into that outcome in a way that betrayed who he was and had become by the end of the story. The whole game, he's becoming more capable, more tactical, and more suspicious and skeptical of those around him, especially in the last chapter when there's multiple lines of dialogue from several different characters specifically calling out Enzo for behaving strangely and suspiciously in the last month as he cautiously prepared for his escape with Isabella to Empire Bay. Enzo was aware of this skepticism around him and the suspicion, and there's even dialogue from Isabella mentioning that Tino had been skulking around keeping an eye on her like he was suspecting her of something. All of this should have been a major red flag for Enzo, and seemingly was, given some of his other dialogue, and it should have heightened his awareness and suspicion of those around him, not lessened it. Which again is why it feels so bizarre that in that last chapter, almost from the outset, he's given the keys to the mine and is told by the Don, you're going to control this now. and he doesn't really respond, even saying thank you. He's just like, okay, well, and then he's like just driving around like everything's totally normal. And then he goes off with Isabella and they're holding hands at the train station, walking to the train, practically skipping. It doesn't make sense. It's weird. And I don't think he would have behaved that way. It feels bizarre. I didn't even touch on this, but literally in the minutes before you arrive at the train station, you run into an associate of Don Teresi and you speak to him because you have to explain why you're in the car with Isabella. And he's like, oh yeah, we are driving down there because there is a deal with the new Baron and we need to get stuff from him. And the guy's like, okay, sounds good. See you later. Don't let me get in your way. But they literally establish that even going to the train station is dangerous. And so then they get there and they start holding hands and like talking about letters. And it's weird. It doesn't work together. They feel so starkly contrasted. It doesn't make sense. Sorry, I'm just slowly crashing out over the course of this video. I don't even know how long this is going to be. Long, probably. I'm sorry. I thought this video was going to be like a solid 45 minutes of me just talking about Mafia the Old Country. It's turned into something much bigger. I'm sorry. That's what you get with Luke Stevens videos. Girth. You're welcome. Now, going back to the central point, others may take the position that Cesare's behavior was also contrived and forced, but I don't personally find that as convincing as just focusing on Enzo's contrived behaviors. Cesare had lived his entire life similar to Enzo in the service of the Dawn. This is all he had ever known, and the last bits of dialogue he shared with Enzo in the back of the carriage on the way to the mine in the last chapter reveals as much. This is all he's known, and he can't fathom why Enzo would throw it away. The oath that they had taken was sacred to him and the family, and Enzo's willingness to break it was unconscionable to him. Enzo, after their fight, tries to explain that he should live his life for himself and not for someone else's ego, a lesson that he had taken from Luca in his last moments, but it's pretty clear that Cesare is unable to accept that or simply just disagrees with it. This is the only life he's ever known, and all he's ever done is follow orders and done what his family obligations demand. And so, even after his boss is killed, he still has his duty to the family and to the oath that he swore. And so in some ways, it's a somewhat noble decision to kill Enzo, though certainly frustrating for the audience. I don't find his behavior to be out of character or out of left field. If anything, I think it's probably grounded in Cesare as a character. It's just frustrating because we wanted him to make a different decision. He just got lucky that Enzo started behaving like a total moron in the last 2 hours of the game. But perhaps another way of looking at it that I like a little bit more is to specifically focus on some of the dialogue that Don Teresi says to Enzo in his last moments. He says specifically that Enzo will never be able to change who he is.
You can't change what you are.
The obvious insinuation here, of course, is that Enzo is a mobster. He's a mass murdering criminal and a member of a massive criminal enterprise who has recently assassinated a baron and multiple wealthy businessmen, not to mention literally hundreds of their employees. And so I believe the insinuation is that even if Enzo were to escape to America, to Empire Bay with Isabella and his child, he would end up doing the same thing. He would end up getting wrapped up in organized crime. It would be another tragedy. He'd keep all of this coming along with Isabella and his child, and it would just continue the cycle. However, this time it would drag Isabella and his child into it, when Cesare now has the opportunity to cut that off and let them truly escape this life. These themes and topics are of course discussed in previous Mafia games, which is why I think it makes sense that the authors wanted the player to think about it for Enzo specifically as well, that maybe he can't change and this is just who he is. And considering that Cesare comes up shortly after this dialogue is spoken, it's possible that he heard the Don say this as well. So I think it's possible that he chose to kill Enzo in a twisted way of protecting Isabella and the unborn child. After all, he lets them escape and even goes out of his way to provide the tickets to the ship so that they can escape more easily, something he didn't have to do. He could have just let them leave. He could have left Enzo's body untouched, but instead he went into his pockets and took out the tickets and brought them to Isabella. In the back of the truck on the way to the mine, Enzo specifically begged with Cesare to protect Isabella and his child because his family was all he had, something that perhaps Cesare took to heart specifically. In a twisted way, perhaps Cesare was trying to give Enzo what he wanted but could never give them, which was a life totally removed from the Mafia and totally independent, starting from actual scratch without any ties to this world, which is what Cesare says to Isabella as he sends her off, is that she has nothing left here, which is now, because of Cesare, true. You could certainly say that it wasn't his place to kill Enzo in order to protect his own family from him unintentionally. And you could also point out something that's very, very fair, which is that it's not typically considered that helpful to kill an individual when they ask you for help. Totally fair. But I do think it's an interesting twist on the story that maybe this was his twisted way of actually helping Isabella and the child, that he didn't trust Enzo and didn't think Enzo could actually do any good for them. And so they needed to break free. Most likely though, it's a combination of the two. And I find this very interesting. So I would love to listen to one of the authors or people who worked on the narrative of Mafia: The Old Country talk about Cesare's motivations specifically. And I also would love to hear them describe Enzo's motivations, because I feel like his, in the last chapter specifically, go off a rail, and it feels so jarring because the rest of the game does it so well. But overall, where are we left? I personally really, really enjoyed Mafia: The Old Country. I think it kind of fumbles the bag at the very, very end, specifically with Enzo. But overall, I really, really like this game. And I think it represents a type of game we don't really get a lot anymore. At the top of the video, I mentioned how some have alluded to this feeling like an Xbox 360 game or a AAA game from that era. And I don't think they're necessarily wrong. I think that's also not necessarily a bad thing. These types of games that are smaller in budget, that are tighter in timeline, that are shorter in runtime, certainly, they don't really exist that often anymore. You'll occasionally get lucky with something like Plague Tale Innocence or Plague Tale Requiem, kind of a AA, low AAA budgeted item that's like maybe 15 hours long on the high end, and it's just a really tight linear narrative game that's got some interesting gameplay but nothing that's gonna like really blow your mind. But they're pretty rare. I mean, they're not that common. This type of game is not that common, and I love them. I think they're really great, and I think that there is a place for them in the market, and I think you've seen it with Mafia: The Old Country. Strauss Zelnick, the CEO of Take-Two Interactive, the parent company of 2K, who published this game, he said on a recent interview on CNBC that the results of Mafia: The Old Country are really, really good. Take with that a grain of salt or not, but he apparently is quite pleased. And as I showed you earlier in the video, they just greenlit further spending on additional game modes like races and horse races and stuff like that, which means we may actually get another Mafia game in this same vein, which I would eat up. I would love that. In a lot of ways, I think Mafia: The Old Country is a triumph. The fact that this game exists at all, even after all of the troubles the devs have had to undergo in the last decade, it's pretty remarkable that we have this period, because not many companies or game studios get the chance to make another game like this after a debacle like Mafia 3. So the fact we have it is pretty remarkable. It's not a perfect game at all. It has plenty of problems, and it certainly is not for everybody. But I really ate it up. And the fact that I can make a multi-hour video talking about the story and the intricacies of the game, I think betrays my passion for games like these. I really, really love them. Video games are a medium where you can tell interactive stories, where you can not just get immersed within the plot points and the characters and the actions therein, but you can specifically get immersed in the world. You can explore the nooks and crannies, wonder what's going on behind that gate. I wonder what they do there. And you can just become in love with the world itself while you're exploring the story and the characters and everything else. And I love it. I love narrative games and stories like this, which is why I get really passionate when I feel like they fumble the bag at the very, very end. You know, I feel like we're doing so well, and then they just tripped at the 1 yard line before getting across. You know, it's too bad. But who knows? Maybe you guys in the comment section will surprise me and you will offer me a counterpoint that makes me rethink the ending of the game and makes me settle and realize maybe I was wrong. Maybe I missed something, and it's actually brilliant and totally justified. Let me know. Leave those comments. I'm genuinely interested. But at the end of all of this, I'm really happy I played Mafia: The Old Country. I recommend that you play it if you like narrative games like this, and I cannot wait to see what Hangar 13 does next. I'm a big old fan of Mafia. This game kept me a big old fan of Mafia. I think it's really, really good narratively speaking. The performances and voice acting, I mean, I didn't have to specifically call it out, but seriously, it's award-winning stuff. Some of the actors, like for example, the actor who plays Tino, he actually replied to one of my tweets talking about the game, and I didn't realize this. He's a member of like the Royal Shakespeare Company. Like, they got some heavy hitting actors who know what they're doing to perform in this game, and you can tell it's really good. And seriously, everybody over at Hangar 13 who worked on the world building, who worked on the sound design, the motion capture, the script, everything, they should be very, very proud of what they've put together here. It's really, really impressive. I'm sorry I got so heated talking about Enzo and his bizarre behaviors at the end, but it's because I care. You know, I'm not mad. I'm just like kind of disappointed. But anyway, let me know what you thought of all this in the comment section below. I'm genuinely interested in hearing your thoughts. And as I said earlier, I'm doing that PS5 Pro giveaway, so make sure to click that link in the link tree, sign up for the giveaway, and you could get a free PS5 Pro just for watching the channel, so please do. With all that said, thanks for watching. I love you all desperately, and I'll see you in the next video. Hugs and kisses.